This is my favorite. The January 2020 Trump peace plan proposal is the Jared Kushner proposal. It's the best. Look at this. This is fucking awesome. These are future Palestinian states basically given to Palestinians.
To the current conflict today. On the 29th of September 2023, the United States National Security Advisor, who reports directly to the president, Jake Sullivan, was speaking at the annual Atlantic Festival, listing off all of the accomplishments that the Biden administration had achieved in the Middle East. After years of brutal warfare that had resulted in more than 300,000 deaths, a 19-month-long truce in civil war-torn Yemen was continuing to hold. The long-running civil war in Syria was beginning to stabilize and settle down as well, while Bashar al-Assad, the longtime Syrian dictator, was finally being welcomed back into the Arab League again after more than a decade-long suspension over his handling of the war in Syria that had claimed the lives of more than 500,000 people. Brokered by China, Saudi Arabia and Iran had finally agreed on restoring their relations in March of 2023, after having been severed 6 years previously. Brokered by America, Saudi Arabia and Israel were also—
So far, very good. Yeah, so far we're 1 minute in and it's very good.
Also on the cusp of normalizing their relations. Iran's attacks against American military bases had stopped, and there was a general sense in much of the world that the chronically violent and unstable Middle East was at last beginning to calm down and enter into a new era of peace. Jake Sullivan himself summed up the general foreign policy mood in the region during that speech on the 29th of September, when he said the following.
And the Middle East region is quieter today than it has been in 2 decades. Now, challenges remain. Iran's nuclear weapons program, the tensions between Israelis and Palestinians. But the amount of time that I have to spend on crisis and conflict in the Middle East today compared to any of my predecessors.
This is actually huge. This actually, from where I'm standing at least, shows that while Israel is America's attack dog in the region, it is actually unironically going way too far with its actions. I personally still believe, and this is wee-woo speculation, I personally still believe that on the one hand, while the Abraham Accords were being continued by Brandon, I think the Brandon camp was also trying to renormalize relations with Iran, or at least start a pathway towards normalization, and maybe even the denuclearization agreement. Okay? Wee-woo. That is my speculation. Why do I believe this? Well, because they did a hostage swap and also unfroze $6 billion in assets. You don't do that for a country like Iran unless you are willing to put your name on something like that. In Hasan's mind, Hasan has never been wrong. I don't know if you guys know this, but like, analysis and speculation is a part of my job. Some of you don't have 3.5 fucking brain cells to put together and comprehend this, but like, you know, that's what I do. Anyway, the point is, what I'm trying to make is, I think what Jake Sullivan's saying here is important to recognize, because that kind of stability in the region was good. It was beneficial so that America could focus on other shit. You know, China, Ukraine, and the like. So when Israel comes in and fucks all of that up, because Israel wants desperately to do its own ethnic cleansing campaign and uses the October 7 attacks as a justification for blowing up everything, which is to a certain degree expected, by the way. Of course, they were going to violently retaliate. But, you know, actions leading up to that violent retaliation due to, one, the Abraham Accords, and also, two, you know, Netanyahu's consistent mishandling and going to the UN and fucking showing a map to the United Nations where Palestine doesn't exist at all. These escalations, beyond the violent maintenance of the apartheid regime, created an opportunity that, created a structure where, like, there was, of course, going to be some kind of violent retaliation that would blow up all of the regional stability conversations. When you blow up the regional stability to this degree, you're actually compromising, for your own personal genocidal interests, you're compromising America's foreign policy, America's foreign policy interest. Can you debunk a recent video with the IDF bunker being, the IDF using a mosque? No, I covered it yesterday. There's nothing to debunk there.
Going back to 9/11 is significantly reduced.
It would only take 2 weeks for those words to immediately come back and haunt him. On the 7th of October, 2023, various Palestinian militant groups led by Hamas, the organization who rules in the Gaza Strip, launched a highly coordinated surprise land, sea, and air offensive against Israel. They managed to fire at least 5,000 rockets against Israel, while around 2,500 armed Hamas fighters managed to break through the walls surrounding Gaza and infiltrated into multiple villages of Israel itself, where they massacred at least 1,400 Israelis and other citizens in a single day.
Well, that number has changed. They probably wrote this video a while ago, but that number is actually not 1,400, it's 1,200 now. The additional 200 number was actually charred and burned. Campaign Socialist, thank you. Charred and burned Palestinian fighters.
Wounded more than 5,000 others, and took around 200 more as hostages back into Gaza. The attack represented the single bloodiest day in the entire history of Israel, and the first time since 1948 that a hostile outside military power managed to break into Israel proper. It all came as a profound shock to the state of Israel, which has since responded with an unprecedented declaration of war against Hamas in Gaza that was followed up by the rapid mobilization of 300,000 Israeli reserve troops, the largest and quickest call-up of reserves in Israel's entire history. The 16-year-long Israeli blockade of Gaza then subsequently transformed into a complete and total Israeli siege of Gaza, with the Israelis blocking off all electricity, fuel, telecommunications, water, and medicine from passing into Gaza through any of their territory by land, sea, or air. The Israeli Air Force began initiating a punishing aerial campaign across the Gaza Strip that saw more than 6,000 Israeli bombs dropped across the territory within only the first 6 days of the war beginning. More than double the amount of ordnance that the United States-led coalition dropped in an entire month in the war against ISIS. As the Israeli airstrikes continued on the 13th of October, Israel ordered that more than 1.1 million Palestinians immediately evacuate from the northern Gaza Strip towards the southern Gaza Strip within 24 hours or be potentially considered as enemy combatants. And then 2 weeks later, on the 27th of October, the Israeli ground forces launched their full-scale invasion into the northern Gaza Strip. And as of the production of this video, have Gaza City, the biggest city in Palestine with a pre-war population of more than 560,000 people, completely encircled. Once the Israeli ground forces push into Gaza City, they will likely experience what many military analysts believe will be nothing less than the most ferocious urban combat seen.
I don't get it. Isn't this from 3 days ago? Why is he talking about it like it's fucking... Is this like an older video that he posted or something? I don't understand. Like, the information that he's bringing up is like, I feel like it's like a week old, or like not even a week old, multiple weeks old.
Seen in history since the Second World War. While Israel's stated military objective going forward is to completely destroy Hamas as an institution and its estimated 40,000 fighters held up in the Gaza Strip, while securing the release of the more than 200 hostages that they continue to hold. And in pursuit of those war aims, the Gaza Health Ministry, run by Hamas, claims that, as of the production of this video, the Israeli airstrikes and ground invasion have already killed nearly 10,000 Palestinians within the Gaza Strip and wounded nearly 25,000 more, in addition to the estimated 1,000 or so Hamas fighters who were killed within Israel during the initial October 7th invasion. A truly catastrophic war has thus once again returned to the Middle East, and the longer that the war continues, the longer it risks spreading like a contagion to drag in multiple other powers into an even greater Middle East-wide war. The brief era of peace and stability in the Middle East has once again been shattered. And in order to understand why this is all suddenly happening right now, you only have to go back a few years ago to 2017 in order to understand how the countdown to war in October of 2023 began originally ticking. By the time that 2017 rolled around, the de facto geopolitical situation of the area was roughly the same as it had been for the past decade ever since 2007. How it got there in 2007 was a very, very complicated story. But to cover through it all...
Oh! Oh, goddamn. He's cooking. We'll see. We'll see.
Very quickly, the British Empire acquired this territory in the eastern Mediterranean known as Mandatory Palestine after defeating the Ottoman Empire in World War I, who had ruled the area for centuries beforehand. Most of the people who lived in the Mandate at that time were Arabs, but Jewish immigration to the land was increasing in scale as the Zionist movement in Europe sought to flee increasing anti-Semitism in places like Russia and later Germany, by establishing an independent Jewish state in the land of their ancient ancestors. The British openly stated that they would support the creation of a Jewish state in Mandatory Palestine through the Balfour Declaration of 1917.
I mean, there's like a couple stuff here that is important to notice, but is important to mention. It's not like obviously mentioning that Jews cohabitated the space for a long time under the Ottoman Empire. That's one. Balfour Declaration being ultimately an anti-Semitic one, and also the subsequent riots that took place as a consequence of like a colonial power that had given assurances to the Palestinians that they might have their own nation state, like their own nationalist movement, at a time when all of the other Arab nations were doing their own nationalist shit. And then how the Balfour Declaration, or the multiple aliyahs, rather than the aliyahs, but the immigration of Jewish people as settler colonialists was done in an aggressive manner that, of course, understandably frustrated the native population. From their perspective, they're not thinking like, oh man, these Jewish people are being victimized by Europeans. They're thinking, why is this fucking European colony bringing a bunch of European people in here after telling us that we could fucking have our own nation state? Like, we collaborated with you against the Ottomans.
Though with vague and undetermined borders. As more Jews increasingly came to Mandatory Palestine, especially after the Nazis rose to power in Germany, the Arabs of the territory resented seeing more of their land getting taken over, and so they revolted in 1936. The British squashed that rebellion, but they attempted to placate the Arabs by restricting further Jewish immigration and land purchases within the Mandate. But this policy angered Jewish groups in the Mandate, and so Jewish militant groups formed who launched their own rebellion, and violence between themselves and the Arabs escalated even further. By 1947, the British decided to give up and withdraw from Mandatory Palestine altogether.
Okay, that's a crazy fucking way to make these jumps, but he is right. The British forces, obviously in British Mandate Palestine, disarmed the marginal Arab movement that was like fighting against them and fighting against Jewish people that were settling in their territories. He also, of course, skipped the King David Hotel bombing that killed 91 people. That was done by a Zionist terrorist group, because the British had made concessions to the native population at the time, because they were like, okay, you guys are getting real mad at us, so we're just not going to keep doing the unfettered, unrestricted immigration into the region. And before we continue on this conversation, there's one thing I have to mention. A lot of people look to this and go, well, Hasan, where should the Jews go? They were being oppressed in Europe. And that is true, right? I 100% agree with that. Like, that is a historical fact. The problem is, you do not think about it. You do not think about it from the perspective of the native population, the native Arab population, and how they were perceiving it. You think about it in a with the lenses of like living in a post World War II world where the Holocaust has happened and Jewish people have faced atrocities against them, with the knowledge that like they withstood a shit ton of pogroms, right? That is not the fucking knowledge that a lot of these people had at the time. It's so amazing how the European gesture of goodwill to the Jews who they haunted for centuries was to give away land that isn't theirs to give. Well, also, they did it in an incredibly anti-Semitic way. Like, they literally thought, oh, win-win. Fucking send the Jews to the desert, dog. Let them fucking fight it out. So sick. It's crazy. It's a crazy thing to do. And it was done by, like, genuinely deeply anti-Semitic motherfuckers, for the record.
And so they submitted the matter of what to do with it to the United Nations, who, in the wake of the Holocaust in Europe, faced growing international pressure for the creation of an independent Jewish state. They came up with the 1947 UN Partition Plan, which called for partitioning mandatory Palestine into 3 separate states.
Okay, this is good. This is also important to mention. 33% Jews at this point, 67% Arabs, and it was a 55% split that favored the 33% Jewish population. Not only that, but also it favored the 33% Jewish population in areas where there was a majority Arab population in the fucking villages. So they would literally end up in this partition plan, they would literally end up giving Israel land, or Jews before Israel, land that the Arabs actually had a majority in, which was fucking ridiculous.
Independent Jewish state, an independent Palestinian Arab state, and an internationally run city-state in Jerusalem. The Arab side, in particular, resented this proposal at the time, though, as they argued it was too heavily biased towards the Jewish side, who were granted most of the mandate's land, despite only representing about 1/3 of the mandate's population at the time. The Jewish side, meanwhile, had misgivings about the plan as well, since most of the big cities and the actual arable land went to the Arab state, while Jerusalem itself was surrounded by Arab territory. But nonetheless, the Jewish side ultimately accepted the plan, while virtually the entire Arab world condemned the UN plan and rejected it. And the violence between the Palestinian Arabs and the Jews—
I want to point to something here, okay? I want to point to something here. It was totally fucking valid for the Arabs to say no to this, okay? And the reason why all the arable land maintained was given to the Arabs is because while the Jewish population that was immigrating into Israel, even during the even leading up to 1947, okay, they were only able to purchase certain land that was not as good. It was not good for agricultural production. It was swampland and shit. They couldn't actually fucking literally go and get better land. One, because people lived there, and two, because people were working on the land. So that's part of the reason why the areas that were given to the Jewish population in 1947 were areas that were not arable. The areas where you couldn't do a lot of agricultural production.
And the mandate only worsened. In 1948, Israel declared its independence from the mandate based on the 1947 UN plan boundaries. But the Palestinians and a coalition of outside Arab states refused to recognize them and immediately invaded, determined to overturn the UN partition plan that they saw as just another form of colonialism, seeking to steal more of their land. But Israel ended up winning that war and agreed on an armistice with the Arab states who attacked them in 1949. The so-called Green Line marked the military front line between the Israelis and the Arab states as it stood when that armistice agreement was signed. And though all of the Arab states at the time were very—
Bro, that's okay. I mean, this part I don't agree with. There is enough historical evidence at this point. This isn't fucking 1994, okay? If you are writing about the inception of the Israeli state in 2023, there is so much scholarly work from people who have literally tested their ideas and have been criticized aggressively, like Ilan Pappé, as a matter of fact, who have been proven correct time and time again. It is, in my opinion, irresponsible to talk about the actions that took place between 1947 and 1949 as though it is a Palestinian war against the Israeli militias and not a purposeful ethnic cleansing and ethnic displacement campaign that is known as the Nakba. Dog, that requires reading. Can I do a quick wiki search? No, RealLifeLore knows better. Get the fuck out of here. He puts a lot of thought and a lot of effort into his videos. There is 0% chance. I don't think he's just like regurgitating shit that he fucking read on Wikipedia. I doubt it. Documentaries? It's not even documentaries, it's books. Like, originally, a lot of the violence was presented, a lot of the violence that the Israeli, well, at the time, you know, the Zionist brigades, some of which were literally self-described terrorists, by the way, and did atrocious acts. The way that this was presented was exactly in the way that RealLifeLore is describing. Like, this is probably how you learn about the inception of the Israeli state if you go to like a Jewish school or that is like, you know, teaching you the Zionist perspective. Okay? This is incredibly biased and at this point completely untrue. Trying to center the Nakba, which is a coordinated attack against all Palestinian life in areas that the Israeli government wanted to take over immediately after the British forces had withdrawn, when there is so much evidence to suggest that this was a coordinated attack, I think is inappropriate and also ahistorical. Talking about this as though this is like all Arab nations as a monolith attacking little old Israel is wrong. And not only is it wrong, but it is the worst kind of wrong, because it's also wrong in the direction that it's wrong in the direction where it's the exact type of genocide denial propaganda that the Israeli government propagates. The Israeli government repeats. There is no like united like a collective consciousness of Arabs either, by the way.
Clear that the Green Line did not mark any final or agreed upon borders. It did mark the de facto border between themselves and Israel nonetheless. At the same time, the Gaza Strip fell under the control of Egypt, the West Bank fell under the control of Jordan, while Jerusalem itself became divided between Israeli control in the west and Jordanian control in the east.
Yeah. This is about where I made it to in the video, or on my own before I turned off, because it sure seemed like a lot was being missed. I'm a dumb guy, so I was waiting for you to watch it anyways. Israel's been bombed and terrorized by Hamas for years. Obviously, Israel doesn't want to bomb hospitals and children, but Hamas is forcing their hand. It's a necessary evil. What? But if this is maddening, is ever going to stop? The moral responsibility to prevent Palestinian collateral damage. Civilian collateral damage lies with Hamas. It's not Israel's fault. Terrorists are hiding among the civilians. Yeah, dude. It's so sad that, you know, you just made me do it. They just, you forced my hand to kill, you know, 5,000 children, dude. Yeah. Thanks, dude. Thanks for the moral clarity here. You really explained that Israel is not the villainous actor here. No, look at that guy's logs. Hamas talked shit for years, and now everybody's crying when the bully get hit. Brother, how do you fucking look at a militant faction existing under an apartheid regime and go, those are the bullies, and not the fucking apartheid? You know what I mean? That's fucking insane. It's insane. This is a completely delusional perspective to operate on. It's unfortunately all too common, like thinking that you won't see the top of the hour ad break at the top of the fucking hour. People say they forced our hand to kill 5,000 children in the occupied territories, but they never considered that maybe the violent actions on October 7th aren't directly a consequence of like deep, undesirable anti-Semitism, but instead to make the fucking occupation as costly as possible after 75 fucking years. It wasn't born overnight. Okay? Hamas didn't even fucking exist, nor was it ever popular. Ridiculous. It still isn't. Just like the top of the hour ad break isn't popular unless you're subscribed. Here's a 3-minute ad break now. How is it that people who want to defend Israel literally just forget about so many instances throughout Israeli history leading up to October 7th. Can you explain why Benny Morris called Ilan Pappé the world's sloppiest historian in the New Republic? I haven't had time to read all these back and forths. It's because Benny Morris himself was one of the first writers that talked about ethnic cleansing and the Nakba. Like one of the first Israeli scholars, but because he's a Zionist, he then had to switch up his messaging, and he hated the fact that other historians alongside himself used his scholarly work to say, yeah, this is ethnic cleansing and not good. The major points of contention between Ilan Pappé and Benny Morris and other scholars in general, out of the new historians, is that is basically that one, the Nakba happened and it was bad versus the Nakba happened and it was good, or the fact that there's still some contention within Ilan Pappé's work, or they will claim that like one line out of Ben Gurion's diaries and letters was mistranslated by Ilan Pappé. There was also the what do you call it? There was also the fucking Tantura. One of Ilan Pappé's students, which he backed and wrote about as well, talked about the Tantura massacre, right? And for years, people actually claimed that the Tantura massacre was false. It was like, there wasn't enough evidence to prove that it was real. And then a couple years later, after the fact, there was a documentary that came out that interviewed veterans. There was a documentary that came out that literally interviewed veterans that conducted the operations in Tantura, the massacres in Tantura, and it turns out everything that Ilan Pappé wrote about, everything everything that he wrote about, and everything that his student wrote about was correct. For years and years, they said he did not have enough evidence to make these claims, that they were like they were exaggerated, and he was absolutely fucking vindicated when the veterans that existed, the veterans that literally fucking engaged in these acts, openly admitted it.
Originally accepted 1947 UN partition plan area also put them in control over large swaths of Palestinian Arab lands, which resulted in about 700,000 of them who either fled or were forcibly pushed out in an event that became known as the Nakba, or the catastrophe, with many of them fleeing towards the Gaza Strip in the West.
Okay, maybe I spoke too soon, man. I fucking pre-watched this. I didn't pre-watch.
To steal more of their land. But Israel ended up winning that war and agreed on an armistice with the Arab states who attacked them in 1949. The so-called Green Line marked the military front line between the Israelis and the Arab states as it stood when that armistice agreement was signed. And though all of the Arab states at the time were very clear that the Green Line did not mark any final or agreed upon borders, it did mark the de facto border between themselves and Israel nonetheless. At the same time, the Gaza Strip fell under the control of Egypt, the West Bank fell under the control of Jordan, while Jerusalem itself—
Bro, I'm sorry, he fucking skipped over to 1949 and is talking about Jordan and shit. Obviously, my expectation is that I thought he fucking skipped
between
it
Israeli
entirely.
Control in the west and Jordanian control in the east. Israel's own expansion well beyond their originally accepted 1947 UN partition plan area also put them in control over large swaths of Palestinian Arab lands, which resulted in about 700,000 of them who either fled or were forcibly pushed out in an event that became known as the Nakba, or the catastrophe.
Also, they fled or either pushed out in an event that became known as the Nakba is like fucking ridiculous.
With many of them fleeing towards the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and others towards Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. And so an independent Palestinian state was—
No, dude, this is like, this framing is inappropriate. I'll say it. I don't think this framing is correct. I'm not even fucking doubling down on it because like, I didn't think that he would cover it, but he actually is. I'm just straight up saying— and I think it's too passive voice. I think Loner Box, who agrees and admits that Israel is a apartheid state, has also done something similar. I don't know why at this point we're still doing like American history book revisionism, as you correctly pointed out, Diane My Coffee, when there's enough evidence to show the contrary. I would never describe the Armenian genocide in a similar capacity. Right? I would not do that. That would be genocide denial. It's crazy. I think like if a Turkish person were to talk about the Armenian genocide in such terms, you would correctly identify that as genocide denial. Oh, well, there was World War I, and, Armenians were forced out of these villages, and some of them escaped, and some of them fled, and some of them were forced out through violent acts, but ultimately there was a forcible displacement of Armenians to the tune of millions of Armenians leaving the area. And it's like, some shots were fired on the process. Some of them died on the process. They were Russian agents, blah, blah, blah. Like, this was a systematic. I'm glad that I actually took that sidestep to talk about Tantura, talk about Deir Yassin, talk about the Nakba, because I think it's very important to understand. I think it's very important to understand that it's not like, because that is the Israeli line. The line is Arab war against Israel. Israel wins. Arabs can suck one. Okay, all Arabs, including Palestinians, and all Arabs are, all of the Arabs and their crimes. All Arabs and their crimes are attributed to the fucking Palestinians in general, and they can suck this Israeli dick. We won fair and square, and some of the people fled, and some of the people, it's disputed, maybe ran on their own volition.
Immediately extinguished. At the same time, in 1949, there were approximately 1 million Jews of Mizrahi and Sephardi ancestry who lived all across the Muslim world as their ancestors had for thousands of years. But over the decades that followed, as Israel established itself further, the vast majority of them were either forcibly expelled, fled, or voluntarily migrated away in a mass Jewish exodus away from the Muslim world, and largely towards Israel. As a result, fewer than 30,000 Jews...
Like, it's kind of wild that almost like, no, he's right. He's talking about the Aliyah, you fucking weirdos. He's talking about Jews that voluntarily came to Israel. A big chunk of them did. Some of them fucking left because they were, some of them ran away because of the pogroms, as I openly fucking point out. Okay? And some of them unironically were like, oh shit, Pog, Israel, love that. It's just funny that the way that he's describing this makes it almost the same as the Nakba, which it's not. That did happen, but it excludes the fact that Israel also pushed for that to happen. I mean, I don't place a lot of emphasis on this, even though Avi Shlaim has written extensively about how he uncovered that Mossad had a synagogue bombing plot in Iraq. Avi Shlaim is an Iraqi Jew in Israel. And I don't place a lot of emphasis onto it because, like, honestly, there are plenty of accounts from Iraqi Jews that openly talked about how awful the conditions were in Iraq for them. So I don't think it's all too important that, like, it's good to show that it corresponded to the Israeli state's interests in populating Israel with Jews. But beyond that, I'm not going to sit here and be like, the Jews in Iraq were, like, perfectly well off and were not experiencing oppression or anti-Semitism. They were. A lot of the... It's not the same as the Nakba, of course. There isn't, they're not... They weren't, like, fucking going into Jewish villages and, like, doing mass rapes and shit. But, I mean, there was still... there was still a lot of oppression that they faced at that point. I think a lot of the nationalist post-colonial movements were anti-Semitic in nature, not due to a innate hatred of Jews or anything. I think it was in many instances learned behavior from the Western world, especially when considering for how long Jews and Muslims in the region had peacefully coexisted, or at least much more peacefully coexisted in comparison to Jews everywhere else. I think that the centralization from the Western powers and also the additional anti-Semitism from the Western powers, from Christian powers in general, who like basically fucking invented anti-Semitism and were the biggest champions of it. I think a lot of that came within the framework of like, we don't want what happened in fucking historic Palestine to happen to us. We see that England is like populating the area with Jewish migrants in an act of settler colonial violence. They are doing this in their controlled territory. What if they do that to us? And then the Nakba happens, and you're like, oh my God, what the fuck? 750,000 Arabs, like, slaughtered, raped, destroyed, forcibly kicked away from their fucking towns they lived in. And that, in my opinion, has the negative consequence, but the foreseeable consequence of, like, making anti-Semitism basically a permanent staple in a lot of these Arab nationalist movements. If it was the Christians that did it and not Jewish people, it would be anti-Christian. You know what I mean? If the Christians slapped on the fucking cross onto their flag, and this was like a Christian enclave that was engaging in these acts, and there was a massive amount of Christian people that were not indigenous to the region, then yeah, there would be the same exact fucking reaction to Christianity, in my opinion. In Algeria, France had 3 tiers population. French then had Jews, that Muslims. They were the first to create the distinction based on religion. Yeah.
Continue to live in the Muslim world today, down from around 1 million in 1948. Today, these Middle Eastern and North African Jews who left and their descendants comprise more than 50% of the Israeli Jewish population.
I know the Crusades happen, okay?
And represent the country's single largest ethnic group today, while another 32% of the Israeli Jewish population are of Ashkenazi ancestry from Eastern and Central Europe.
Well, comment on the HasanAbi productions of you and Willie Mack defending your stance a week ago. I'm still getting hate replies. Brother, there's a reason why I don't normally react to drama perverts, because the communities that they've fostered are some of the most psychopathic. Like, they have nothing else to live for, which is why they'll just hold on to it. So stop. Just completely fucking cut it out. Cut it out. Cut it out from your life. You will never win. Turn off your fucking DMs. Turn it off. Don't respond. Disengage. It's not. They will never stop. They will never stop. Or, you know, criticize them, correct the record. Criticize them, correct the record, and move on. These are fucking Kiwi Farms losers, brother. They have no life. This is all they do.
Who represent the second largest group. Ever since that time, both the Palestinians and the Israelis have struggled defining where one of their territories begins and the other ends, within the overall territory of the former British Mandate, and have struggled with achieving universal recognition by the outside world. Israel's mostly internationally recognized boundaries today consist of that so-called Green Line dating back to 1949. But there were also the additional territories that came under Israel's control during the later Six-Day War of 1967 that lay beyond the 1949 Armistice Green Line. Territories that are usually referred to as either the post-1967 territories or the Israeli-occupied territories. They include the Sinai Peninsula seized from Egypt, the Palestinian-inhabited territories that Israel seized from Egypt and Jordan, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights that were seized from Syria. After Israel seized all of these territories back in 1967, the United Nations Security...
What is this? Is there documentation about Jews living there before Zionism not being okay with it when they came into the region? Not being okay with it. I mean, I don't know what that.
Council passed Resolution 242, which effectively considered them all as occupied territories that the Israelis should immediately withdraw from, while the Arab League convened at Khartoum in Sudan, where they proclaimed the 1967 Khartoum Resolution, explicitly laying out their foreign policy towards Israel going forward. No peace with Israel, no recognition with Israel, and no negotiations with Israel. A policy that became known as the Arab world's 3 no's, and the foundation upon which no Arab state would recognize Israel's existence in any context or shape for decades. Over the decades that followed from 1967, Israel treated each of their post-1967 acquired territories very differently. Israel agreed to return the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt in 1979, in exchange for a formal peace treaty with Egypt and Egyptian recognition of Israel's right to exist, marking the first time that an Arab state would ever do such a thing, and the first time that an Arab state would violate the 3 no's agreed upon by the Arab League back in the 1967 Khartoum Resolution. Israel then unilaterally decided to annex all of East Jerusalem in 1980, and subsequently proclaimed a unified Jerusalem as its own capital city, something that the United Nations would immediately declare as legally null and void under international law with Resolution 478, that considered East Jerusalem to still be an Israeli-occupied territory, and which also called upon all UN member states to withdraw their embassies from Jerusalem in the aftermath, which
I don't know what the fuck he's gonna get to in an hour if he like skipped over a bunch of shit.
Everybody eventually agreed to do. By the time 2017,
I feel like I don't know if this is a patchwork of different kinds of videos that he put together, because a lot of this stuff is like old information in the beginning, and then there is like a shit ton of history that he skipped over. And I don't know what's happening.
rolled around. There wasn't a single other country in the world outside of Israel who recognized
Half the video is detailing Trump's actions of recent events. I guess that's the reason. Yeah, he's just kind of skipping a lot of this stuff. Israel gave back the land. Can barely hear you, dude. Wait, really? What do you mean you can barely hear me? I can't tell if motherfuckers are saying that because they just don't have their speakers on, or what the deal is. You know, what the dog doing? What the dog doing?
Israel's annexation of East Jerusalem, or Jerusalem, as the sole capital of Israel. Israel also decided to unilaterally annex the Golan Heights outright back in 1981, an action that the United Nations similarly declared under the passing of Resolution 497 immediately afterwards as null and void and without international legal effect. The Golan Heights would continue to be universally recognized by the entire international community as Israeli-occupied territory of.
It just seems like a lot of what Israel has done is universally acknowledged as like inappropriate, illegal, against international law. And yet for some fucking weird reason, they get away with it time and time again. It's because America allows it to happen. First the British and then America.
Of Syria for decades. And this also continued to remain true by 2017. That left the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, which Israel has also treated very differently from all of the other post-1967 territories. Egypt renounced its claim to the Gaza Strip in the peace treaty with Israel in 1978, while Jordan formally renounced its claims to the West Bank and East Jerusalem a decade later in 1988, before becoming the second Arab state to make peace with Israel and recognize Israel's existence in 1994. Those renunciations by Egypt and Jordan to the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem, and Israel's continued internationally unrecognized occupation of all of them, left them each effectively as Palestinian-inhabited territories trapped in a state of permanent legal limbo for decades, as thousands of Israeli settlers began moving into all of them and displacing and angering the Palestinians who lived within them even further. After decades of violence between the Israeli authorities and the settlers on one side and the Palestinians on the other, in both the West Bank and East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, the Israelis and the Palestinians eventually agreed upon the Oslo Accords of 1993 and 1995, which established the Palestinian Authority as an interim Palestinian government body that was eventually assumed would, one day, take over full authority in the entire occupied West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, as the eventually fully independent state of Palestine. But in the interim until then, the Israeli and Palestinian sides agreed on what originally was supposed to only be a temporary division of the West Bank into 3 distinctly different areas with varying levels of control between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli military and state. Area A would be the territories assigned entirely to the Civil and Security Administration run by the Palestinian Authority. Area B would be the territories assigned to only the civil administration run by the Palestinian Authority, but with a security administration that would continue to be run by the Israelis. And then there was also Area C, which would continue to be entirely run by both the Israeli civil and military authorities, without any influence from the...
How dope, man. What a great deal, huh? Wow. Seems very fair and balanced, I think. Zero chance he skips the Intifada. He's just not doing it chronologically, right? Yeah.
The Palestinian Authority at all, which effectively placed Area C under the continued de facto control of Israel. Area C consists of approximately 61% of the West Bank's total territory, and is presently the home of all of Israel's settlements and settlers in the West Bank, wedged all in between the Palestinian Authority's area.
Damn, dog. Seems to me like the Oslo Accords did not result in a contiguous state for the Arab citizens here. I fucked it up. I fucked up the word. Seems to me like more and more partitions were occurring that created a structure of Bantustans, like not dissimilar to motherfucking apartheid South Africa. Doesn't seem too pog to me, dog. I don't know. Seems very weird, champ. And not very pog tramp to me. I'm just going to say it, okay? Aiden Ross calling. Yeah, dude, on God, for real. That's a big L, Israel. Big L, okay? Not a W at all. Seemingly bad deal. Bad deal making.
Area A and Area B, and ringed all around Jerusalem, where more than 99% of all the land is either strictly off limits or heavily restricted for Palestinians to access. Area C is also completely contiguous in area, while the Palestinian authorities administer territories in Areas A and B are not contiguous, and divided between 165 separate enclaves in between the contiguous Israeli-administered Area C, that is chock full of Israeli settlements in a situation that is sometimes...
That's a good deal, by the way, boys.
Sometimes been referred to as the Palestinian archipelago of the West Bank, and a system that has been very frequently compared to the system of apartheid that
respect to RealLifeLore for saying
ruled South Africa and
fucking pre-watch
forced upon their black population until 1994.
It
was initially intended by the Oslo Accords of 1995 that all of Area C would be gradually transferred by the Israelis over to the Palestinian Authority's administration. But to date, that has never ended up happening. Within 1 week of the Oslo II Accord being signed on the 28th of September 1995, that established the system of Areas A and B in the West Bank, and granted the Palestinian Authority limited control, the Israeli Prime Minister who signed them, Yitzhak Rabin, was assassinated by an Israeli right-wing extremist who was opposed to the concept of any independent Palestinian entity. And the next election that came the following year in 1996 brought Benjamin Netanyahu into the office of Israel's Prime Minister for the first time, which resulted in a stalling...
Yeah, bro. They voted for the fucking guy who called for his assassination. You want to understand? Big L for Israel, dude. Imagine getting a motherfucking Eagles fan. Go Birds. Yeah, Israel, dude. Isn't real. Racking up the fucking L's, letting a dude from Philadelphia run the country, run the show.
Of any further negotiations between the Palestinian Authority and Israel. The supposedly temporary divisions within the West Bank agreed upon in 1995 immediately before...
No, he's from Philadelphia. He's not a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. If he was a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, there would be peace in the Middle East.
Or Yitzhak Rabin's assassination have remained indefinite ever since, and the pace of Israeli settlers moving into Area C has only continued. At the current date in 2023, it's estimated that around 230,000 Israeli settlers live in the post-1967 territory of East Jerusalem, while another 470,000 Israeli settlers live within Area C of the West Bank.
Damn, that's crazy. Seems to me like they lied about the two-state negotiations specifically so they could continue in an unfettered manner, rapidly expand into the West Bank with seemingly no end in sight, with the hopes that they could maybe continue doing pogroms and make the lives of Palestinians living on occupied Palestinian territory as unimaginably cruel and unusually torturous as possible with the hopes that they could just, you know, peacefully, ethnically cleanse them from the land. Damn, dude. Seems to me like these deals weren't that good.
Across at least 132 separate...
Steelers build. Eagles destroy. Steelers like to build. Eagles like to destroy and live in sewage and bomb shit. Ben Shapiro build.
Settlements and more than 140 separate outposts, where they have full civil and political rights like every other Israeli citizen does, and representing a four-fold increase in Israeli...
It's just like, people love saying like, man, this is just so confusing and so complicated, and it's like, okay, like any Jewish person in America, no matter where the fuck, or anywhere around the world, could just literally go and have full citizenship and full rights and literally would get paid actually to go live in the fucking West Bank. But the motherfucking Palestinians that live like a couple miles away, the millions of Palestinians that used to live there can't go there. What do you mean? How is that allowed? How is that okay? Full rights aside from self-determination or marrying or buying a land or house or no. Jewish people in Israel have full rights. What do you mean? Oh, God. I just realized, is Fetterman a Steelers fan? Weeby. How do you live with that? Don't fucking say no. Don't try to deny it. Was I wrong all along about Pittsburgh? City of brotherly love. Not looking too bad right now. Let me tell you. I don't know, man. He was talking about the Palestinian citizens of Israel, dude. I know, but I wasn't talking about the Palestinian citizens of Israel. I was talking about Jewish people that are not Israeli citizens yet. The amount of rights they have is you know, unlimited. They have unlimited rights. They can do whatever the fuck they want. In the West Bank, Palestinians that used to live there can't go there again.
Settlers in the West Bank since the Oslo Accords were initially signed in 1995. This is in comparison to around 300,000 Palestinians who also live within Area C and are subject to Israeli military rule. Another roughly 2.8 million Palestinians who live confined within the Palestinian archipelago of Areas A and B under the Palestinian Authority's administration in the West Bank, and another...
Just, you know, to also, important to mention that, like, Israel routinely bombs and conducts military operations on Areas A and B that they have no business being inside of, but they still control it to a certain degree. When they're not doing that, they also get the Palestinian Authority to conduct, policing and at the behest of the Israeli security apparatus. So overall, whenever you see like bulldozers in the fucking West Bank, they're literally going into Palestinian territory that they have no business being inside of to do more terror.
362,000 Palestinians who live within the Israeli-annexed East Jerusalem, all of whom have almost zero say over how they are actually governed. Israel's continued control over Area C in the West Bank for decades and hundreds of thousands of settlers that they have allowed to move into the territory since the 1990s have been frequently labeled as a violation of Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which plainly states that, quote, the occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory that it occupies, in this case being the West Bank. Meanwhile, by 2005, Israel maintained about 8,000 settlers across 21 different settlements in the Gaza Strip, but by then, the situation was becoming untenable.
I mean, dude, I think part of the reason why Israel defends the settlements unconditionally for the most part is because, like, it is low-key how the fucking state was formed, you know what I mean? You're just kind of doing more Israel. You look at the settlements in the West Bank and you're like, well, I mean, this is how we did Israel. Now we're just doing Israel plus, right?
tenable. At only about twice the size of Washington, D.C., the Gaza Strip was geographically much smaller than the West Bank was. But with a population of 1.4 million Palestinians back then, it was also substantially more densely populated and urbanized than the West Bank was as well. The high costs associated with defending only a few thousand settlers in this crowded urbanized territory was becoming too costly for Israel to bear. And so, in 2005, they decided to unilaterally withdraw.
I respect RealLifeLore again for saying this, because the way that this is presented in Zionist propaganda is like Israel, small bean, loves fucking Palestinians so much they're like, here, we'll give you Gaza. Go ahead. Bullshit.
Draw from the Gaza Strip altogether. All of the 21 Israeli settlements inside of it were destroyed. All 8,000 Israeli settlers within Gaza were either evacuated or forcibly withdrawn, while the military withdrew as well, and for the first time, the entirety of the Gaza...
Yeah, they were relocated. Where'd they go? Oh, that's right. They went to the fucking West Bank. These motherfuckers are crazy, bro. It's like, it's insane. Settlers are on some other shit, 100%. Like, I know the similarities between, like, Israel proper and, like, how it came to be. Collection of settlements and settlements in the West Bank and Gaza are a little different. But, like, it's so crazy. Did you saw the Hamas photos on October 7 on their website? Ask yourself, do you think Hamas went to an Israeli company called Wix, okay, and said, Ahmed, let's start a website for Hamas, okay? Let's use Wix, bro. Like, while they're getting bombed into oblivion. Damn, bro, these motherfuckers are not doing BDS. I wag my finger at the Hamas leadership for not practicing boycott, divestments, and sanctions of the state of Israel with their utilization of Wix.
Gaza Strip's land territory was passed over to the Palestinian Authority. Although Israel continued maintaining control over virtually all of Gaza's land crossings, with a fence they constructed around the entire territory back in 1994, along with continued control over all of Gaza's airspace that included Israel's destruction of the only airport in the Gaza Strip back in 2002. And then, finally, came the Palestinian legislative elections of January 2006 shortly afterwards, in which the political party known as Hamas achieved an unexpectedly decisive victory. Before then, the Palestinian Authority had been always...
Okay, bro, it's 3%. Like, I wouldn't say it's like an unexpected... It's unexpected, but I wouldn't say it's decisive. And ultimately, the details of the election are that they're, like, running on an anti... This comes on the heels of no belief that the Palestinian belief that the Israeli government is going to offer them any sort of peaceful solution that recognizes their autonomy. Not going to work. Okay? People don't trust them anymore. People don't trust it understandably at this point. And Hamas is running as the anti-corruption ticket, as opposed to Fatah, which is in the pocket of the United States of America. And also Israel will vote for Hamas, and then America in the American-backed election. George W. Bush then pushed for a coup, which I'm sure
controlled
he'll
and
mention.
dominated by the secular, socialist, and Palestinian Arab nationalist party known as Fatah, who had initially sought Israel's total destruction and the establishment of a secular, Palestinian Arab socialist state over the entirety of the former British Mandate area in its place. But it subsequently made peace with Israel during the Oslo Accords and then restricted their ambitions to establishing an independent Palestinian state limited only to the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip instead. By contrast, Hamas was a Sunni Islamist and Palestinian nationalist party who argued that Fatah had become too complacent and too cooperative with Israel and had abandoned the true original Palestinian cause. Hamas continued to be fully committed to Israel's total destruction, the same way that Fatah had used to be prior to the Oslo Accords. And separately from Fatah, Hamas advocated for the eventual establishment of a Sunni Islamist Palestinian state across the entirety of the former British Mandate area, once Israel...
He's like, bro, I promise, dude, I will be so violent. Like, I promise, dude. Do not worry. It's the moment that we get the hostages, bro, I am fucking blowing shit up. Don't worry. The genocide will continue.
Israel had been completely destroyed. After a brief civil war within the Palestinian Authority between Hamas and Fatah, Hamas emerged victorious within the Gaza Strip and pushed Fatah out completely by the middle of 2007, which has ever since led to a continuous division with...
Oh, the Yemeni response to U.S. officials asking to release the ship and their crew? Yeah, it is pretty funny. The U.S. Department spokesman calls on the Houthis to immediately release the detained ship and its crew. I do understand why the American State Department was like letting the Saudi forces do a genocide in Yemen for as long as they did. These motherfuckers, when you unleash them, are an unimaginable force. Just an unstoppable force. They literally, dude, there is no recovery. There is no recovery from going from a fucking ethnic cleansing campaign to like taking over ships like this in a matter of months. Are you out of your mind? They keep interviewing them in Yemen. They, like, people go there, they interview them. They're like, what are you doing? And they're like, yeah, we're going to keep doing it. You can't stop us. What are you going to do? Kill us harder? You've been trying for the fucking past year, past multiple years. They're crazy. They're crazy. That was an incredibly weird thing to say, but I get what you mean. There's never been a bigger glow up than going from straight up. I mean, I guess you could say this about like Israel, but like the difference is these guys went from being genocided to fighting against like actual, like the hegemonic superpower. A lot of the Jewish people that came on ships from the Holocaust fought alongside like an actual standing military against like the Palestinian villages that didn't really have any power whatsoever. You know what I mean? That would be like a similar glow up, I guess. But even then, Stuart Seldon was the deputy director of the U.S. State Department. I know, we talked about it already. Saying Yemen had the glow up as if the Iranian ballistic missiles are just the accessory that completes their new look. Yeah, I mean, they did.
Within the Palestinian leadership, the Sunni Islamists of Hamas based in the Gaza Strip, who are fully dedicated to Israel's total destruction and the eventual establishment of a Sunni Islamic state across the entirety of the former British Mandate in its place, and the secular, socialist, and nationalist Fatah based in the...
I mean, that's... That, oh, they said till 2017. So I guess that is technically true until 2017 when the new charter literally is like, we actually love everybody. We just don't like Zionists.
Palestinian archipelago of the West Bank, willing to work together with Israel to eventually establish an independent Palestinian state based on the entirety of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, while recognizing Israel's own borders based on the 1949 Armistice Green Line, the same way that Egypt and Jordan do. But Israel responded to Hamas's uncompromising takeover of the Gaza Strip in 2007 by initiating a complete land, air, and sea blockade over the territory.
Yeah, I mean, this part is also incorrect. The blockade preceded the full-blown Hamas takeover, and the full-blown Hamas takeover came as a consequence of a coup that failed, an American-backed Fatah coup that failed, and they already had like a blockade propped up before. So I don't know why the fuck people say that. They make it seem like, oh, Hamas, scary. They want to take over everything in Israel. That's why the blockade had to happen. It's like, no, that's not correct.
That harshly limited the ability of Palestinians or goods to exit or enter. A blockade that Gaza's other neighbor, Egypt, agreed to fully participate in on their side of the border as well. The 1994-era fence surrounding Gaza by land across Israel and Egypt was then extensively upgraded into the modern system of high walls, barbed wire, motion sensors, and even robotic machine guns, while the Israeli Navy enforced a maritime no-go zone around the Gaza Strip by sea, while the Israeli Air Force enforced a no-fly zone over the Gaza Strip's airspace. Israel's stated aims of enforcing the blockade over the Gaza Strip were to restrict—
What airspace, dog? You blew up the fucking air. He said they blew up the airport in 2001. Suspicious. So the airport blew up in 2001, and yet the blockade didn't happen until 2007. Something to consider. Why was the airport not built again? There were still Jewish settlers living there until 2005. I wonder what was going on.
The ability of the Hamas-led government inside from being able to import weapons from abroad to use against Israel, and to economically strangle the Hamas-led government and apply pressures on it to either moderate its position or face a slow, grinding collapse with a permanent scarcity of resources and supplies, generating unrest amongst the Palestinians they were elected to.
Anybody have family in Israel? I do, and don't know what to tell them. Brother, I don't know. I have, I know like older Jewish people that have reached out in like the past couple of months that I try to connect with, like some of my friends in the movement, some of my Jewish friends in the movement. I mean, in the anti-Zionist movement, because I feel like I'm not the perfect person to be able to. I'm not the perfect person to be able to like convince people, but it's no different in many ways than trying to fucking talk to your parents about Fox News. You know what I mean? Like, think about it. We think like Israel and anti-Zionism is like a totally separate thing, but the reality is, it's no different than trying to talk to your fucking anti-vaxxer parents. You know what I mean? About why they should stop watching Fox News and poisoning their brain. Many instances, the propaganda comes from the exact same fucking vectors too.
To govern, but
you know, keep trying, I guess.
For the past 16 years that have followed this blockade of Gaza beginning, Hamas has neither moderated its position nor collapsed from power, while frequent fighting has consistently erupted between them and Israel ever since. And so, the joint Israeli-Egyptian blockade has continued on without a pause now for the past 16 years that have followed ever since 2007, a situation that has been frequently labeled as one of the 21st century's vastest humanitarian catastrophes. Israel's 16-year ongoing blockade of Gaza has been frequently labeled by human rights advocates as a form of collective punishment applied to everyone who lives within the Gaza Strip, while Israel has always counter-maintained that the policy is necessary to protect their own citizens from attacks coming from Hamas. Notably, Gaza's population has increased from about 1.4 million people when the blockade began in 2007 to about 2.2 million people today in 2023. Meaning that about 800,000 of the Palestinians within the Gaza Strip, or about 40% of the entire population right now, are currently children 16 years or younger who have been born during this total blockade and who have literally never known anything other than life confined within the walls, enforced by the Israeli military, and stuck under Hamas's continued uncompromising leadership. And all of the accompanying poverty, hunger, resource scarcity, and occasional ferocious violence that has come with it. At only about twice the size of Washington, D.C., the Gaza Strip has since become one of the most crowded and densely populated places anywhere in the entire world. And surrounded by high walls and a naval blockade on all sides, and an enforced no-fly zone above it, where hardly anyone is ever allowed to leave for any reason at all. It has also frequently been referred to ever since as constituting nothing less.
This is just an attack on Titan? No, because there's no fucking, like, Hamas doesn't have the world-ending capabilities that you know, it's so stupid, okay? No, it's not Attack on Titan. It's not. It's not Attack on Titan because Hamas doesn't have the genocidal world-ending capabilities, okay? Shut the fuck up. Oh, you mean Israel is the Titans? Yeah, I'm sorry, dude. As much as of a fucking weeb pervert, wee pervert I am, okay, I can't do this. I'm not gonna fucking sit here and compare real life genocide to a fucking anime. Okay,
than the
stop.
world's largest open-air prison, wherein the highest ambitions for any of the millions of people within the prison to have aspired towards for the past 16 years have been limited only to either escaping from it or becoming the prison's new warden. This was the extremely complicated geopolitical state that Israel and Palestine both found themselves in between 2007 and 2017. With Israel effectively managing its post-1967 acquired and occupied territories with a suffocating blockade enforced around the Gaza Strip, increasing the numbers of its settlers in Area C of the West Bank, accompanied by frequent talks of annexing parts or all of it directly, and prior outright annexations of East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights that nobody else in the outside world recognized as being legitimate. At the same time, Israel was maintaining international recognition based on its 1949 Green Line armistice borders with most of the world's other countries, though with very notable exceptions continuing in the Arab and Muslim worlds who had largely never recognized Israel's existence ever since the end of the British Mandate in 1948, along with several anti-colonial or anti-Western socialist states like North Korea, Cuba, and Venezuela. By 2017, the only Arab states that had ever recognized Israel's existence and made peace were Egypt in 1980 and Jordan in 1994, with all the others continuing to hold ranks in solidarity with the Palestinians, and the three no's of the 1967 Khartoum Resolution.
I mean, I think a lot of this stuff is also silly because the relations between Israel and the surrounding regional powers certainly got better over the course of the past 20 years, regardless of normalizing relations openly on paper. The Abraham Accords are simply making this relationship public.
The state of Palestine, meanwhile, based on its claims to the entire West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip from the Oslo Accords in 1993 and 1995, and represented by the Fatah-led Palestinian Authority, was recognized by most of the outside world as well and was granted the status of a permanent observer at the United Nations in 2012. Though, very notably, lacked any official recognition across most of the Western world, including none from Israel, the United States, Canada, Australia, Japan, and most of Western Europe. And despite its continued de jure claims to sovereignty in the entire West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian Authority really only maintained de facto authority over the Palestinian archipelago within the West Bank, with the rest of the West Bank and Area C under continued Israeli colonial and military rule, East Jerusalem being annexed directly into Israel itself, and the Gaza Strip under the control of its rival Hamas government, completely blockaded by the Israelis and Egyptians, with frequent violence erupting all around it. This was the general situation that remained more or less the same between 2007 and 2017, until things finally started rapidly changing even further in favor of the Israelis after Donald Trump assumed the American presidency in January of 2017. Within his first year of assuming office in December of 2017, the Trump administration extended official U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as the capital city of Israel, which effectively extended formal U.S. recognition to Israel's unilateral annexation of East Jerusalem as well, an action that had previously gone unrecognized by the entire international community since 1980. The day after the U.S. announcement was made, the UN Security Council called for an emergency meeting, where 14 out of the 15 members universally condemned the American decision. But it was vetoed and overturned by the sole remaining member of the council, the United States itself. The vast majority of the world's leaders sharply condemned the American decision because it effectively meant that the United States would never recognize East Jerusalem as being a part of any future independent Palestinian state. To date, only a handful of other countries have followed the Americans' lead in recognizing a unified Jerusalem as being exclusively Israel's capital, Guatemala and Honduras, and the only partially recognized state of Kosovo being the only other ones. Hamas, still blockaded within the Gaza Strip, immediately seized on the opportunity to demand a new Palestinian intifada or uprising be launched against the Israelis in response to the American decision. On the 14th of May, 2018, the United States officially transferred its embassy to Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, with the new embassy's grand opening, which sparked mass protests organized by Hamas within the Gaza Strip near to the Israeli border wall that went on for every single Friday for nearly an entire year and a half until the end of 2019. that tens of thousands of Palestinians participated in, and which the Israeli Defense Forces responded to harshly with frequent tear gas and sniper fire that resulted in the deaths of at least 223 Palestinians and more than 9,200 injuries. And in the same month that America recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, the Netanyahu administration's ruling Likud party in Israel passed a resolution that instructed Israeli legislators to finally begin pursuing the full unilateral annexation of the West Bank next. An action that Israel had long resisted formally doing ever since 1967, largely out of the fear of what the international backlash towards them would end up being. Then, after becoming the first outside country to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel in 2017, the United States under the Trump administration chose to officially recognize the 1981-era Israeli annexation of the Golan Heights next in March of 2019. Making the United States the first and so far only other country besides Israel itself to recognize the Golan Heights as fully sovereign Israeli territory rather than as Syrian territory under the occupation of Israel. These American recognitions of Israel's sovereignty over East Jerusalem.
2018 March of Return wasn't organized by Hamas. It was organized by a random poet. There was actually no Hamas presence according to the people on the ground. And the people that were shot at were children, women, elderly, nurses, and the like. Also, disabled people, people in a wheelchair, pregnant women. Yeah, just extremists like pregnant women. Yeah, I mean, the reason why I get mad at the Biden administration is specifically because the reason why I get mad at the Biden administration is because they literally fucking follow through on the actions taken by the Trump administration.
And the Golan Heights were each continued forward with the Biden administration after 2021 as well, and it has since become a policy that is widely viewed by countries all around the world as an act of enormous hypocrisy on the part of Washington, as America has recognized Israel's unilateral annexations of territories that the entire rest of the world considers to be occupied and which America itself considered to be occupied for decades.
That's so crazy. So strange that like America's word is bond, but when I say America is the hegemonic superpower and that it is also bad, it does a lot of bad things, everybody fucking chirps at me and cries about it. Two things that edgy white boys on the internet and edgy Americans especially that want healthcare cannot fucking stand is when you say American foreign policy has done a lot of bad objectively around the planet and it is the most powerful nation on the planet. And in order to be the most powerful nation on the planet, it has to do a lot of bad. I don't like that. And the other thing that the edgy white boys especially fucking hate on Reddit, who are like, I love healthcare. I think I want to have healthcare. It would be great if we did. But God damn it, do not say anything that disparages white people across the board on immutable characteristics. You're fucking racist. You're more racist than people that shit on black people, actually. Those are the two things, and they happen to be the two major motivating principles behind most people and their interests online. Like most political circles online have to literally take the pro-American position, and you can't say anything, God forbid, about white people, even in jest, even if you're white yourself. I unfortunately take the exact opposite position on both of these issues, so that's why I draw a lot of ire. Another thing that you can fucking also assuredly draw a lot of ire from if you support it is sex work. So trifecta, you know?
Well, America simultaneously has fiercely rejected Russia's unilateral annexations of territories in Ukraine.
Yeah, anti-white racism. Why die on this hill? Racism is the same as making someone who is short. Karen is a slur. Oh my God. Also, we're going to keep calling you a terrorist and keep calling you a Hamas supporter. Keep saying the N-word. Keep defending saying the N-word as a white person. And we're going to literally nonstop make websites, take out ads, calling you a Hamas supporter over and over again. We're going to call you a terrorist over and over again. Okay, none of this is Islamophobic. After all, we have bastardized your words to say that you actually do support terrorism, a designation that we've created for you specifically. Okay? Yeah. Yeah, no, totally, guys. It's I'm going to take it very seriously when a community of individuals who compare me to Osama bin Laden and say I'm a fucking terrorist supporter over and over again, who've like built websites linking me to Hamas, are actually very offended at the usage of what they declare to be slurs.
That are also considered to be occupied, like Crimea, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk. It has since made it appear to many outside observers that America isn't actually serious about upholding the norms of international law, but is only interested in selectively applying it to its rivals like Russia when they occupy and annex territories, while ignoring it for their friends and allies like Israel when they occupy and annex territories. Then it was in the following year, during a White House press conference on the 28th of January 2020, when the Trump administration, alongside the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, revealed what they each referred to as the deal of the century, better known as the Trump Peace Plan, the Trump administration's political proposal to finally resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict once and for all. The plan envisaged an independent Palestinian state composed only of various separated enclaves.
This is my favorite. The January 2020 Trump Peace Plan proposal is the Jared Kushner proposal. It's the best. Look at this. This is fucking awesome. These are future Palestinian states basically given to Palestinians, and they want to build a tunnel underneath Israel that goes between West Bank and Gaza. Okay. And this is the tech corridor, and there's only one way in and one way out of the tech corridor. You want to go to like a tech enclave here, you have to go through this one-lane highway or multiple-lane highway. Fucking sick.
Within the West Bank, that would continue to be divided and completely surrounded by significantly expanded Israeli territory well beyond the recognized 1949 Armistice Green Line. The plan also completely rejected a Palestinian capital based in East Jerusalem proper, which the Trump administration had effectively recognized as fully Israeli territory back in 2017. Instead, the plan proposed that a new Palestinian capital would be exiled to the outskirts of Jerusalem and be separated from Jerusalem proper and all of Jerusalem's holy sites by the Israeli-constructed West Bank wall that now fully encloses the city from the rest of the West Bank. The plan even further demanded that these limited concessions allotted to a future independent Palestinian state would only be accepted by Israel and the United States if the Palestinian side first agreed to a status of total demilitarization and disarmament, and agreed to completely abandon all international legal action against Israel and the United States as well. And then, even further, during the press conference that was announcing the plan in the White House, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, declared that the Israeli government would be immediately annexing the entire Jordan Valley and all of the Israeli settlements within the West Bank. This would have effectively resulted in an Israeli annexation of 30% of the West Bank's territory, and the third formal unilateral annexation of the Israelis in the post-1967 territories that virtually the entire world beyond the
the Jordan Valley being controlled by Israel is a non-starter. Numerous suggestions have been made, maybe like an international UN-backed military that controls the Jordan Valley on the border is a non-starter. They literally are like, nope, that's never happening. We have the water and we have the border.
The United States and Israel consider to be occupied territories. The 2020 Trump peace plan was ultimately resoundingly rejected by virtually all Palestinians, and even many Israelis alike, along with most of the rest of the world. Joe Biden and every other leading Democratic 2020 presidential candidate labeled the plan as a smokescreen for the Israeli annexation of the occupied West Bank.
Yeah, that's really weird that Joe Brandon said that, because he's like, Joe Brandon's like, one state, Jack, but you know, in the way that Smotrich, Bezalel, good guy, real handsome guy, that guy, Bezalel Smotrich. One state for Israel, no Palestine. That's what I want.
The UN rejected the plan and reaffirmed its own commitment to a two-state solution within the former mandatory Palestine based on Israel's pre-1967 Green Line borders, and a Palestinian state in the entire West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. Mahmoud Abbas, the longtime undemocratic leader of the Fatah Party and the Palestinian Authority since he won his only election in 2005, showed a map of the Trump peace plan at the United Nations Security Council that he famously described as turning Palestine into Swiss cheese. And naturally, both his own government in the Palestinian archipelago of the West Bank and his rival Hamas government in the Gaza Strip rejected the plan as being too heavily biased towards the Israeli side. Moreover, even the Israelis' Yesha Council, an umbrella organization representing the hundreds of thousands of Israeli Jewish settlers in the West Bank, rejected the Trump peace plan as well on the simple basis that it granted the Palestinians an independent state at all, which they were completely opposed to, even in this extremely limited context. But as it became clear that the 2020 Trump plan defining an enlarged Israeli state and a shrunken Palestinian state would never be implemented over the vast disagreements on all sides involved, the Trump administration began making significant advances for Israel on the diplomatic front anyway. Behind the scenes, the Trump administration had been mediating negotiations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates that suddenly resulted.
Yeah, it's always good to just like completely avoid the Palestinians and the deal-making process that is supposed to figure out what happens to the Palestinians in general. That's always a solid way to ensure that you'll definitely have permanent peace.
In a shocking joint statement between them on the 13th of August, 2020. Israel agreed that they would indefinitely suspend all of their plans for annexing parts of the West Bank like the Jordan Valley and their settlements in Area C, while in exchange, the United Arab Emirates agreed to fully normalize their relations with Israel, with the first ever direct commercial flights launching between them by the end of the month. It was a shocking announcement, because it represented only the third time in history, since the British Mandate of Palestine expired in 1948, that an Arab state had ever recognized Israel, after Egypt had done so back in 1980, and after Jordan had done so in 1994. From 1994 onwards, for the next quarter of a century, none of the rest of the Arabs would officially break rank and make peace with Israel.
Yeah, except it doesn't matter, because they were still literally working alongside Israel since then. Especially after 2001, especially during the War on Terror, like the idea that the Gulf states have not been American client states in perpetuity is a silly one, in my opinion. That's why we give them a lot of leeway, like including when they fund Salafist militias and shit, or Wahhabist fundamentalist militias, all around, as a matter of fact, all around the region. Yeah, motherfucker, I'm American. I don't know if you know this. My name is Hasan. I'm Turkish, but I'm also American. So, like, the countries that the United States of America does not like in the region are the same countries that also have a problem with Israel's existence, like unironically has a problem with Israel's existence, and has gone back and forth on their own relationship with Israel. Syria being one, obviously. Yemen, or at least the Houthi government of Yemen, certainly. Iran being the major player in the region. But every other country in the region has always been unconditionally in support, and Iraq at certain points as well, and Lebanon at certain points as well, to a certain degree. But every other country in the region has always been, mostly favorable towards Israel. They might make a big stink, like Turkey, but as I've told you before, like Recep Tayyip Erdogan will fucking cry and yell about Israel and say, wow, Israel, you're fucking violent. Your time is over. Your time is over. You're done. We know you have nukes, but you can't do shit. Your time's over. We're going to fuck you up, Israel. While there are pipelines going through Azerbaijan to Turkey into Israel that literally give 40% of fuel to Israel. It's all theater. It's all theater. What do you mean Erdogan is crying about Israel? I thought he was Israel's president. Oh, no, think you mean Bashar al-Assad. Oh, you mean Erdogan. Oh, yeah, that's probably Israel's president. I saw that video too, man. It's great. Listen, there is no bigger power online than a fucking quirked up white boy, okay? Quirked up white boy with a Ben Shapiro affect. You will be able to, especially if you're like a little edgy, you are going to literally be the king of the white boys online. It don't matter how fucking stupid you are. It literally does not matter how little you know about a situation. As long as you're confident, oh my God, and you speak confidently and in an arrogant tone, and you sprinkle in a little bit of edgy talking points in there, you can rest on your laurels. You can always just simply repeat stuff that MSNBC is saying. As long as you are a little bit edgy, everyone will go, wow, this is a surefire way to win arguments online.
Sticking on paper to the 1967 Three No's Agreement that they had all agreed upon back in Khartoum all that long time ago. But now, all of a sudden in the summer of 2020, seemingly out of nowhere, the United Arab Emirates had become the third Arab state overall and the first Persian Gulf state to openly violate.
Like Hasan when he repeats Bibi being from Philly, the fucking pure copium, the metric ton of copium coming from motherfuckers who just are so ashamed of the city of brotherly love, which Benjamin Netanyahu is from. Okay? It's okay, man. Sometimes you got to eat that kind of horse manure too. All right, go birds. Go birds. Just saying. Look at this. He's from Israel, born, bitch. No, totally, man. You're right. You're right. He certainly didn't grow up in Philadelphia. You're so right. Benjamin Netanyahu is more Pennsylvania than Dr. Oz is? Yes, because Dr. Oz is New Jersey. Mehmet Oz. He's from New Jersey. Benjamin Netanyahu is from Philadelphia.
Violate the 1967 Khartoum Resolution and make peace with Israel without the final status of the Palestinians being resolved first.
You can't say any of the things they're saying in the chat. Benjamin Netanyahu lived in Philadelphia for longer than I lived in New Jersey. It is ridiculous. Benjamin Netanyahu lived in Philadelphia for longer than I lived in Los Angeles. Get the fuck out of here. In his most formative years. You will never, I mean, he went to MIT as well, so he was in Massachusetts too. Okay? Doesn't Oz's dad know your grandpa? Yes. Mehmet Oz's father was also a doctor. That's anti-Semitic, bro. No, it's anti-Philadelphia, and a lot of people can't fucking cope with it. He's from Cheltenham. That's the Naperville of Philly. I don't care. Still Philly.
First, and it would be far from the last to do so. In a series of subsequent negotiations that came to be known overall as the Abraham Accords, the Trump administration was able to almost immediately convince Bahrain, after the United Arab Emirates, to become the fourth Arab state to fully normalize their relations with Israel in September of 2020. Then, just 3 months after that, in December of 2020, during the closing days of the Trump administration, the United States was able to convince Morocco to become the fifth Arab state to fully normalize their relations with Israel as well. That one was accomplished by Washington offering that, in exchange for Morocco recognizing Israel, the United States would extend its formal recognition to Morocco's unilateral annexation of the disputed territory of Western Sahara, a territory that Morocco had previously unilaterally declared to completely annex as their so-called southern provinces all the way back in the late 1970s, but which remained unrecognized by anyone else in the outside world for decades afterwards. With the
These Arab states are literally fake friends, bro. The leadership of these nation states are they're irrelevant to the needs of the population, but also they don't listen to the needs of their own populations, especially on this issue. But that's why Israel has to not go too far, because then they'll fuck up all of these trade relations and these like normalization agreements that America has worked long and hard for. Because then people are going to fucking lose their minds. They're going to be like, what the fuck? Why is my government doing a deal with Israel when these motherfuckers are butchering Muslims? Now, ultimately, what's the meme? It's like, if you really want the Muslim world to truly defend Palestinians, tell them that Israel is no longer Jewish but Shia. And I say this as someone from a Sunni Muslim country, okay? Yeah, you tell all these motherfuckers that Israel is now converted. They're Shia Muslim. They would have a much easier time defending Palestinians.
United Nations having always considered the Moroccan annexation, like all other unilateral annexations that have come following World War II, to be legally
New Jersey is Sunni? Yeah, New Jersey, the Sunni, the Sunni Muslim nation of New Jersey that I grew up in.
Null and void. So, in exchange for Morocco's recognition of Israel then, the United States became the first country in the world to ever recognize Morocco's unilateral annexation of Western Sahara, just as it had become the first country to ever recognize Israel's unilateral annexation of the Golan Heights and East Jerusalem in the couple years beforehand, all of which would ultimately provide even more hefty diplomatic ammunition to countries like Russia to blast the United States with later on, over Washington's hypocrisy regarding its selective applications of international law, approving unilateral annexations of UN-recognized occupied territories whenever Israel and now also Morocco do it, but fiercely rejecting it whenever Russia...
Like, how can you fucking feel so much hatred in your heart for Russia against Ukraine, which in many instances is justifiable to feel, but like you do not reserve a fraction of that anger for Israel? Like, it blows my mind, dude. It blows my fucking mind. It's so crazy.
Russia does the same thing in Ukraine. 3 years later, in 2023, Israel would return the favor granted by Morocco by becoming the second state in the outside world to formally recognize Morocco's annexation of Western Sahara.
Because Ukraine is white, dog, is really not that hard. I mean, no, it's... Brother, first of all, whiteness is a political concept. We already mentioned it. Slavs were not necessarily considered white in certain points in time, both by America or Nazi Germany. But also, it's not like Israel and Palestinians are different than one another. None of those motherfuckers are white, okay? Have you seen people who are living in Israel? Have you met a Mizrahi Jew? They're Arab. Israel's not fucking white. Neither is Palestine. And Palestinians have white people, and there are Ashkenazi Jews in Israel. Like, it's a diverse environment. The entire region is incredibly diverse. The difference here is Ukraine is in the Western sphere of influence. It has a strategic interest for America, and so does Israel. That's the major difference here. Israel's stuck in its white supremacy. Yeah, to a degree. I don't know. Do you not support Ukraine? I have not only materially supported Ukraine, but I think I've supported Ukraine better than the American State Department has, time and time again, in demanding that there should be a ceasefire and peace negotiations, which, again, I advocate for a fucking ceasefire and peace negotiations in Gaza. Everybody yells at me and says, Hasan, you want Israelis to be genocided. I advocate for a fucking ceasefire and peace negotiations in Ukraine, and they say, Hasan, you want Ukrainians to be genocided. It seems like Americans just unconditionally fucking hate peace. Okay? Doesn't matter. I could be siding with the Ukrainians who are being attacked and invaded. Okay? Still, no peace there. I could be siding with the Palestinians who are being attacked and invaded. No peace there either. America just hates peace.
As well. And then on January 6th, 2021, on the very same day that a mob of pro-Trump supporters stormed the American Capitol building in Washington, D.C., another event of monumental geopolitical importance was simultaneously taking place over on the other side of the world, within the symbolic capital city of Sudan, Khartoum, the very location from which the Arab League had previously proclaimed its three no's policy towards Israel more than 53 years previously. That day on January 6th,
I think the three no's, he focuses on it way too much. Like, the three no's are completely meaningless. Like, all of these countries, way before the Abraham Accords, had already, like, all but officially normalized relations with Israel. I just don't think that it's all that important, or was all that important. The only difference is that they were openly willing to recognize Israel.
In that precise symbolic location, the Sudanese government became the next Arab government to formally sign on to the Abraham Accords as well, which initiated the process of full Sudanese normalization with Israel as well. In order to convince them, the Trump administration had agreed to remove Sudan from America's state sponsor of terrorism list and provided them with a $1.2 billion loan to help clear Sudan's government debt to the World Bank. And just like that, the Trump administration was able to increase the pace of Israel's recognition in the Arab world from only 2 across 72 years of history to 4 more in fewer than 5 months, bringing the total up to 6 of them by 2021. And all without the underlying issue of Palestinian statehood being resolved first, that had long prevented Israel's recognition by any of the Arabs. By the time the Biden administration assumed office in Washington, it was seeming as if Israel was indeed going to be able to both eat their cake and still have it too. The Palestinians themselves were fully contained, divided, or scattered with an uncompromising Hamas-led government still dedicated to Israel's total destruction blockaded in Gaza, a mostly cooperative and collaborating Fatah-led government, isolated and divided across areas A and B of the West Bank, several million more completely removed Palestinian refugees scattered across Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, and about 1.6 million Palestinians.
There's so much in this process that he didn't mention of how the Fatah government not only got owned by Israel time and time again, but also like completely shed any remaining confidence that the Palestinian population had, and why they lost all confidence from the Palestinian population. Mostly because of the, he didn't mention the intifadas, but also the reasons as to why it happened was because Israel purposefully, what? Oh, dude, fuck. That was so sick. I can't believe you banned that guy. What did he say? Fuck, 2 guys with insane takes. One guy said, what is it? Anti-fascists are fascist, and the Ottoman Empire was on par with Nazi Germany. Hasan is a socialist hypocrite. The other guy said, wait, where the fuck is it? It was like unhinged. He was saying like, it's terrifying that there's such a large community that's built around like hating the only Jewish country. I'm not clicking on that. Hasan is a buy.
Palestinian citizens of Israel itself, who comprised a minority of only about 20% of Israel's citizen population, despite Palestinians' total population across all of the former mandatory Palestine area, today remaining a slight majority at about 51% of the overall population, compared to the Jews at about 47%. To say nothing of the several million additional Palestinian refugees beyond the former mandatory Palestine in Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Lebanon, who have consistently argued for a right of return to the area of the former British Mandate that they or their ancestors fled or were forced out from. A right that represents a major component of Israeli-Palestinian negotiations that has always been refused by the Israeli side. From the Palestinian perspective, if more and more outside Arab states continue normalizing their ties with Israel, despite the Palestinians' dire situation on statehood, it could eventually have reached a tipping point where the Israeli government would eventually feel secure enough in a region with fewer overtly hostile hostile enemies to finally begin the process of formally annexing territories in the West Bank, like the Jordan Valley and their numerous settlements, if not the entire West Bank altogether, something that has long been a goal of numerous right-wing and far-right Israeli parties for decades, but which has so far always been resisted out of fears of what the international response towards them would end up being. But if the fear of a harsh international response was removed, then what other deterrent would there have ever been? For the incoming Biden administration in 2021, the next goal for continuing on the Abraham Accords even further and achieving the biggest prize of all would be convincing the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to become the next Arab country to normalize its relations with Israel as well. By this point in time, to most of the monarchist Gulf Arab states, Israel was already naturally starting to be viewed as less of an
the German Zionist Jews collaborated with the Nazis is a silly thing to mention. It was one group. They also, ironically, then became very socialist and very pro-USSR. But not only that, it was the Leahy group. But also, that is like similar to saying Palestinians collaborate with the fucking Nazis because the British-backed Mufti had talked to Adolf Hitler when a significantly larger number of Palestinians literally fucking died during World War II fighting against the Nazis. Don't mean shit. Yeah. There were Zionists who thought that Nazi Germany would be far more favorable to the Zionist cause than the British, especially during the what do you call it? Especially during the one Havar agreements originally, and also during the British clamping down on Jewish immigration into the region. But it doesn't matter. This does not reflect the broader movement, and it's also kind of a gross thing to fucking say when, you know, the Nazis are kind of known for something far worse. The extermination of 6 million Jews, I mean. So pointing to like one collaborationist movement of violent psychopaths within the Zionist movement is ridiculous. The Mufti was not a Palestinian leader in any way whatsoever. Yes, he was a British. No, he wasn't. I'm saying he was like some fucking random British-backed leader that they had placed in a position of power. It was not a leader that was he was a puppet. BB equals Big Boss makes sense now. No, Big Boss is not from Philadelphia, unlike Benjamin Netanyahu, who is
an outright hostile enemy and more of a potential ally that they could maybe cooperate and do business with. The theocratic Islamic Republic in Iran, ruled by the Ayatollahs, and their ideology of radical Shiite Islamic revolution, had long espoused a foreign policy that advocated for the eventual unification of the entire Muslim world beneath the authority of their own Shia-dominated clergy, which included three initial objectives to accomplish first in very specific orders of importance. Number 1, destroy and remove all American and Western influence in the Islamic world that was perceived as a lasting vestige of the age of colonialism and corruptive. Number 2, completely destroy the state of Israel.
For the record, like, the Shia position on this is anti-American, regardless of what some Shia leaders have said. Overall, I will say that, like, even what we've shown with like Hasan Nasrallah talking about anti-Semitism amongst Arab nations, it is unironically closer to a correct position as far as like America's involvement than what you hear from even pro-Israel Gulf nation state leadership that will then unironically repeat anti-Semitic nonsense.
Of Israel that is similarly viewed by Iran's regime as a foreign Western colonial power occupying lands that are historically and rightfully Islamic. And number 3, spread the Islamic Revolution and the authority of Iran's Shiite clergy to the rest of the Muslim world, which necessitates overthrowing and toppling all of the...
It's official. Thank you, Elint News, for the update. According to Barak Ravid from Axios, breaking, the government has approved the deal for the release of the abductees. Regardless of I suspect what Itamar Ben-Gvir and many other of the religious far-right ultra-Zionists said. So, anyway, yeah, this stuff is very unlikely.
The various monarchies that exist across the Muslim world, that Iran's clergy deem to be heretical and contradictory to where authority within Islamic states should truly lie, with the clergy and not with the nobility. Thus, ever since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, Iran has been consistently opposed to Israel's entire existence and to the existence of the Sunni Muslim monarchist regimes reigning in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Jordan. Just before 2020, when the Abraham Accords began rapidly accelerating Israel's recognition across the Arab world, the Iranians were making significant geopolitical gains against the Arab.
How Iran and Saudi met a few weeks ago? Iran and Saudi met a few weeks ago because China is now trying to get them to normalize relations, and has been relatively successful in doing so. That's the reason why the blockade ended in Yemen. Did you ever consider visiting Israel, like filming a vlog there? Fuck no. One, I'm kind of terrified, like I will admit. I'd much rather go to West Bank or Gaza instead of going to Israel, but even then, I am afraid. Go to China? I am less afraid of going to China, despite, you know, my commentary and criticisms of the Chinese government, specifically on separatist movements in Xinjiang and Uyghurs. But, of course, I have no criticisms of China. They've never done anything wrong and totally are just and valid. But overall, I'm less afraid of China than I am of Israel, for sure, 100%. Chinese government or USA government? No, I'm not afraid of the USA government. I'm an American citizen. Ultimately, I live in a country where there's at least like some semblance of free speech. That I do stand by. I hate when these dumb motherfuckers are literally like tone policing on my coverage of an ongoing ethnic displacement and ethnic cleansing campaign.
Arab monarchies specifically. They had successfully backed the Shia-adjacent Houthi movement in Yemen and kept them in power over most of the western side of the country, immediately opposite from Saudi Arabia's Shia majority and unstable southern border, and directly across from the strategic Bab el-Mandeb Strait, through which a large amount of Saudi Arabia's oil exports flow through. Despite the Saudis spending nearly $265 billion in a years-long military intervention to crush the Houthis that failed. Iran's Shia militia
yeah, just like I try to crush the chatters of the top of the hour ad break and fail because many of you are subscribed. Here's the 3-minute ad break.
Organizations were growing increasingly powerful and influential in Iraq after the destruction of ISIS. Bashar al-Assad's government was winning the civil war in Syria against the Saudi-supported side. Hezbollah was growing even more powerful and more heavily armed than the Lebanese government itself, while the Gaza Strip, ruled by Hamas, remained a thorn in the side of both Israel and the anti-Islamist regime in Egypt of Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. These pieces, carefully positioned by the Iranians over decades across the board of the Middle East, represents what Tehran likes to call its axis of resistance.
I'm just saying, it would be really crazy if, and hear me out, okay, you recognize that Iran is greatly interested in purging your influence in the region because it correctly calls you an American state, okay? Here's how you can effectively eliminate one wing of that axis, okay? The anti-Israel, anti-American axis, anti-imperialist axis in the region. Offering Palestinians autonomy and you know, recognizing, not gonna lie, people saying everything is anti-Semitic comes off way more anti-Semitic than anything you've said in the last 10 years. Well, I don't think I've ever said anything anti-Semitic in the last 10 fucking years. Or in combating anti-Semitism diligently for the last 10 fucking years. But anyway, as I was saying, here's a really cool idea. It's called making one singular state where Palestinians have rights and liberties, and therefore there is no militant faction that is violently trying to rid what some may call the Zionist entity. You know, it could be a very effective way to stop that. Also, you know, normalizing relations with Lebanon. Saying. Maybe even good faith normalization of relations with Syria. Oh, fuck. For a second, I thought Israel was an autonomous country and not simply another American state and an unsinkable aircraft carrier and a forward operating base for the United States of America. That's part of the reason why they can't do any of those things, because that would go against the interests of the United States of America. So there you go. That is part of the reason. It's a perfect allegiance. Israel wants to permanently expand and claim that it's being conducted. This permanent expansion that's occurring is being done at the behest of their real national security concerns. That permanent expansion strategy will then turn around and create unironic national security concerns for Israel. This continues to destabilize the entire region. While it makes the lives of Israeli citizens unsafe, Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs alike, as a matter of fact, but it doesn't matter because ultimately it helps America. It helps America's interest in the region. As long as Israel doesn't get too horny to fucking kill too many Palestinians, which would then cause much larger destabilization in the region, which Israel's currently doing now.
And Saudi Arabia was beginning to feel like the Axis was encircling them. And then in 2019, Iran itself, or its proxies, even fired cruise missiles at Saudi Arabia that blew up the kingdom's biggest oil processing facilities at Abqaiq and Qurayas, that temporarily knocked half of the country's oil
Wait, I thought that was Houthis that did that.
production offline. An attack that the kingdom's historic defender, the United States, refused to retaliate over. The Saudi monarchy quickly calculated after those attacks and after their military quagmire in Yemen that in order for them to have the best shot at surviving the coming inevitable confrontation,
Iran did it. I mean, it's Houthis that did it. They shot Iranian missiles, but I think it was the Houthis.
Confrontations with Iran over the rest of the century, they could no longer continue relying exclusively on their status as the world's biggest exporter and supplier of oil to keep the United States interested in defending them. A country that was becoming increasingly self-reliant on their own oil production through the shale and fracking revolutions. They needed to lock down an ironclad mutual defense treaty with the United States, just like the ones Washington has with their closest allies like NATO, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the Philippines that would legally bind the United States to come to the kingdom's defense if they were ever to be attacked by Iran or their proxies again. And to help lock that treaty down, they began to also recognize that the enemy of their enemy could also end up becoming their friend. And that friend was potentially Israel.
Bro, that's it. Okay. This is wrong. Like, this is so wrong. This is literally if you unironically look to like what leadership has said about Israel and truly believe it. This is why I keep repeating. No, they covered for Iran and claimed it. Iran launched munitions from the Ahwaz airbase. The Quds 1 cruise missiles used don't have the range to reach from Houthi-controlled territory. Oh, shit. I thought it was the Houthis that did it. But, again, like, all of these fucking countries had already been working in all but name with the Israeli government. Ahwaz? Not Ahwaz.
A country they had long opposed on the basis of solidarity with the Palestinian Arabs, but a country that posed no serious existential threat to the monarchy in the Saudi kingdom, the same way that revolutionary Iran and its axis of resistance did. That's part of the context that contributed to the Sunni monarchies in the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain agreeing to both recognize Israel with the Trump administration's mediation in 2020. And it's been a heavy part of the calculus that
Turkey will be a key player in the negotiations. No, they won't. I mean, I guess they will, but once the negotiations have actually concluded. Okay, here's what I will say. Like, all of the Arab leadership coalition that's, like, going to China to negotiate, every single part of that is bullshit, okay? There's only one guy at the table, not Turkey. It's America. Okay? Only one guy at the motherfucking table here. Only one guy that has controls all the levers of power is the United States of America. That's it. What will happen after the conflict or this iteration of the conflict is over? Yeah, sure, they'll have regional partners involved, Turkey being one of them. You're not wrong about that. But overall, this is just America's say-so.
That has been going on with the Biden administration's attempts to mediate a further normalization agreement between the Saudis and the Israelis next. And thus, across 2022 and 2023, the Saudis, the Israelis, and the Americans were all negotiating and discussing this process to jointly solve all of their own unique problems of the 2020s. Going into the negotiations, the Saudis were deliberately, artificially cutting their own oil production lower and lower to the point where their spare oil production capacity reached 3 million barrels of oil per day by October of 2023, meaning that essentially within a single month's notice, the Saudis could, hypothetically, decide to just flip a switch and unleash the spigots and dump an entire Brazil's worth of oil production onto the world market again, which would, of course, dramatically reduce global oil prices, greatly taper global inflationary pressures and fuel prices leading into the upcoming American presidential election, while simultaneously harming Russia's ability to continue financing.
Wait, the Scream producers came out and explained. Spyglass says Melissa Barrera was fired from Scream due to rhetoric that flagrantly crosses the line into hate speech. Spyglass Media Group initially declined to comment when Variety broke the news of the company had dropped Melissa Barrera from the cast of Scream 7, but now the production banner behind the hit horror franchise revival push is pushing back on the narrative that has quickly coalesced around the decision that Barrera was fired for showing support for the Palestinian cause. Instead, a spokesperson clarifies that Barrera's posts were interpreted as anti-Semitic. How cowardly of the mainstream media to literally be like, well, they're interpreted as anti-Semitic. That's how you know it's like they're openly stating that it's probably not. Spyglass' stance is unequivocally clear. We have zero tolerance for anti-Semitism or the incitement of hate in any form, including false references to genocide, ethnic cleansing, Holocaust extortion, or anything that flagrantly crosses the line of hate speech. In the wake of the October 7 Hamas terror attacks and Israel's subsequent attacks on Gaza, Barrera has been posting on her Instagram about the conflict, sharing posts that accuse Israel of genocide and ethnic cleansing. Wow, that's crazy. That's so fucking anti-Semitic. And distorting the Holocaust to boost the Israeli arms industry. Spyglass, I don't even know what the fuck this means, by the way. Spyglass quickly cut ties with the In the Heights actor following the post. Barrera was slated to star in the next Scream outing after leading the 5th and 6th entries in the past 2 years. Barrera is no longer working with the publicist, though it is unclear who dropped whom when the relationship was ended. It's fucking crazy, dude. It's crazy. Jenna Ortega is pro-Palestine too. Yeah, if you notice, she hasn't been as vocal this time around. Okay? She has not been as vocal this time around. I wonder why. Because every single person pretty much understands that if you fucking say anything and everything, there's motherfuckers waiting for you to waiting to misconstrue what you're saying if you're pro-Palestinian. So they can be like, oh, see, I told you. Yeah, no, this is a nut up or shut up moment, or more so, shut the fuck up. Don't say anything about Israel. She posted a story from a Jewish person's perspective. She's smart. Yeah, I mean, even that could still lead to problems for you. Yeah. Fist fight every Palestinian so that Jesus can come back to earth.
Financing its war in Ukraine, as Russia, being the second largest oil exporter in the world, overwhelmingly relies on selling its own oil and gas reserves to fund their own government and military expenditures. And the lower global oil prices are, the less money Russia has to continue funding its war in Ukraine. The Biden administration, obviously, would greatly desire this outcome of the Saudis unleashing their taps. And to sweeten the deal even further, the Saudis would be willing to fully normalize their relations with Israel as well, granting the Biden administration a historic political achievement that the Trump administration before it wasn't quite capable of acquiring. All they were asking for in return was for Washington to solve all of their own problems. An ironclad mutual defense treaty permanently committing the United States to the kingdom's future defense against Iran, and American nuclear energy technology to enable the Saudis to establish a nuclear energy industry that would include the ability to enrich their own uranium. That, in a pinch, could enable the Saudis to rapidly develop their own nuclear weapon in the event that the Iranians suddenly developed one first. To the Biden administration in the United States, a deal enabling greater cooperation between the Israelis and the Gulf-era monarchies was also highly desirable for multiple reasons. It was well known by this point that America was attempting to finally withdraw most of its military forces from the Middle East, in order to focus on countering what Washington views as the far more pressing geopolitical challenges of the decade. Russian military aggression and expansion in Europe, aimed at Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and likely elsewhere in the former Soviet world, and Chinese desires to fully and finally dominate Taiwan and East Asia. The Biden administration's commitment to finally withdraw from America's military presence in the region, to focus more aggressively on these other theaters, was most infamously symbolized by the disastrous American withdrawal from Afghanistan in the summer of 2021, and the ensuing Taliban blitzkrieg that immediately catapulted the Taliban right back into power again that undid nearly all of America's trillions of dollars, thousands of lives, and decades of efforts spent trying to dislodge them. Washington knows that Iran and its axis of resistance remains its most potent geopolitical threat in the Middle East, who is the most capable force of throwing the entire—
You don't have to ban the guy that says your face is annoying, mods. It's okay.
entire world economy into chaos by launching wars in the Persian Gulf and all around the world's most critical oil and gas trade routes. The consequences of which would be spiking global oil and gas prices that would most immediately benefit the Russian war machine that is still raging across Ukraine. This is why the United States now more than ever needs its local allies in the Middle East who have historically not cooperated well together because of the Palestinian issue remaining unresolved, to set aside their differences and finally begin cooperating to contain Iran and its axis of resistance, while Washington's own forces relocate to focus on containing China in the Pacific and Russia in Eastern Europe. This is why the United States wants Israel and Saudi Arabia, its two biggest partners in the Middle East and the two greatest Middle Eastern military powers beyond Iran and Turkey, who have never had any formal relations before, to finally begin working together along with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain against all of their mutual enemies in the region, Iran's axis of resistance. And then to Israel, Saudi Arabia, of all countries extending their recognition to the Jewish state, would be a permanent game changer. Saudi Arabia is the leading oil exporter of the world, and with that comes enormous economic power. Dominated by its world-leading oil exports, Saudi Arabia wields what is by far the largest economy in the Arab world, that is more than 2.5 times larger than the Egyptian economy, despite having only a third of Egypt's population. The Saudi economy is indeed so outsized compared to the rest of the Arab world that it represents nearly 1/3 of the entire Arab League's combined economy all on its own. Saudi Arabia is thus most often thought of as the premier leading Arab state today, despite having only the 6th largest overall population in the Arab world. And it's not just because of Saudi Arabia's outsized economic power either, but for their religious legitimacy within the worldwide Islamic faith, owing to their control and stewardship over the two holiest cities and sites in Islam.
Guys, I cover the hostage deal update. I know.
Mecca and Medina. If the Saudis recognized Israel's legitimacy then, there's no telling how much further their heavy weight would have carried, with influencing even more Arab and Muslim countries around the world to recognize Israel next, especially in the context of Sudan, Morocco, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates, all recognizing Israel immediately beforehand too. But the Saudi monarchy knew that simply recognizing Israel without addressing the underlying question of Palestinian statehood at all would have been a deeply unpopular move among their own people, who continue to overwhelmingly value their solidarity with their fellow Palestinian Arabs more than the cold geopolitical calculus that the ruling family prioritizes for the sake of their own survival. And
I swear this video way overstates the importance of religion in a lot of this shit. I also think that it basically set up the Abraham Accords as like a serious peace process, like a serious move towards peace, without factoring in that like Israel is an apartheid regime. There was no mention of the fact that Israel's an apartheid regime, and it completely glances over the subject matter, especially when we're talking about why Israel was originally attacked. And the irony is that it is a very Western-focused, it is ironically very Western-focused approach to the subject matter. I mean, it's dense and it's correct. Like, a lot of the stuff that he's mentioning is not wrong, but the major problem is that if you frame it this way, then you're like, well, and then October 7 happened, and Palestinians did that to fucking destroy the beautiful peace process that America had worked so hard alongside Israel. Now, I'm pretty sure he's a liberal. I don't think he's a Trump supporter or anything like that. Having said that, he said it's an apartheid when he was talking about the archipelago of Palestine. Okay. He briefly mentioned it. You're right. My point is, has been called an apartheid state is not enough, and it being an apartheid state is the fundamental reason why Israel was originally attacked. Like, there is no other reason. All of this other stuff, he did compare it to South Africa and Bantustans, which is good. But all of this other stuff that's going on that completely writes out Palestinians from the supposed quote-unquote peace process is part of the reason. Is part of the reason why October 7 happened, certainly. However, it's also another major misstep by the power player in the region. I look at this with, I think, an extremely critical lens where I look at Israel's arrogance in the way that it has dealt with the Palestinian people as bad governance in general. Beyond the morality of the situation, which I think is abhorrent, and apartheid is completely not permissible. It's ridiculous. It's violent. It's horrifyingly racist. But I do think personally that Israel has also done a very bad job so far, especially since 1967. Really fucking bad. If your goal is permanent security and not like a suicidal interest in never ending expansion in the region, a region that is like becoming more hostile to you due to your fucking violent actions, both towards the Palestinians and to other fucking countries in your neighborhood, of course this is going to happen. And of course you're going to have security problems for your citizens. I think that you cannot continue behaving this way with hopes that, like, America will always bail you out. And this is a reality that even the internal security apparatus of Israel has recognized and has tried to rein in. Israel kept getting in his own way because the overarching Zionist agenda was to take over the entirety of this land that Palestinians were on top of still. And in order to do so, in order to try and do so with, or rather, in order to, Israel tried to do this while also trying to not piss off the Western world or the Arab nations in the region or the Arab populations in the region. A lot of these policies, in my opinion, should be analyzed from this very important framework that the Israeli government, okay, as an entity separate from the Israeli people, always and forever has operated in a way where they care more about Palestinian expulsion than they do about Israeli security. They demonstrated this on October 7th. They demonstrated this on October 8th. And they demonstrated this on October 6th too. One of the first actions that the Israeli government engaged in was to immediately start bombing Gaza while there were still hundreds of Palestinian militants inside of Israel proper. That, to me, shows what the truth is. It shows that the overarching goal here is to just, like, utilize any opportunity to expel or to kill as many Palestinians as you possibly can.
So, Riyadh was also demanding some limited and relatively small concessions from the Israelis relating to the ongoing Israeli occupation of the West Bank, in order to save some face and appear to continue being the Arab world's champion. But this was proving difficult for specifically the new Israeli government of 2023 to accept, because it was a brand new coalition government, largely composed of hardcore right-wing Israeli nationalist parties who wanted to completely annex the entire West Bank outright. The preceding November 2022 legislative elections in Israel had resulted in what has been called the most far-right government in Israel's entire history, a byproduct of years' worth of higher fertility rates among Israel's most religious sects of Judaism, resulting in a shifting of demographics further towards the religious right that is expected to continue for decades to come. Leading into the negotiations on normalization with Saudi Arabia, Benjamin Netanyahu was already considered to have been fighting within Israel for his continued political survival. His new coalition government in 2023 consists of pro-settler parties like Jewish Power and the religious Zionist Party that favor deporting Palestinians considered to be disloyal from Israel and favor further Israeli annexations in the West Bank. The coalition agreement between Netanyahu's own Likud party and the
That's just bad framing. There were 5 elections. The demographics didn't change in 1 year. There's two competing interests here. One is Benjamin Netanyahu's own personal motivation to try and remain in power so he doesn't go to jail. And two, a lot of these parties, including the Likud party itself, like Likud being a popular party in Israel is already unacceptable. Ridiculous. But then these other guys also gaining more prominence as a consequence of the Israeli politics becoming more and more right-wing happens under, it would have happened under any circumstance as long as Israel had an apartheid. This is why when you look at the centrists in Israel and you listen to what they have to say about the treatment of Palestinians, you will recognize that even they are like totally on board with destroying Gaza, totally on board with wiping out Hamas. Hamas terrorism cannot live, cannot exist. And the only way that we can deal with it is by fucking mowing the lawn again. It's just, this doesn't happen overnight. It happens over years and years and years of constantly reinforcing why you must have the permanent security assurances in the only way you know how, which is by further oppressing Palestinians. Just look to America. Just look to America. Our politics get increasingly more violent year over year. We talk about like trans rights and stuff, or we talk about like how women's rights are great here in America. We have gay marriage and shit. But ultimately, when you look to American politics, there's always a consistent ratchet effect. And this very same thing already is also occurring in European countries with more and more far-right elements gaining prominence in European parliaments, in European countries. AfD in Germany, Meloni in Italy, some of which have already seized control. Le Pen in France, but then you look at Le Pen in France, and then you look at fucking Macron and his dealings. Instead of demonstrating a strong left-wing opposition, instead of allowing a strong left-wing opposition that is populist, but economically populist, and also socially progressive, these guys, the neoliberals in power, turn around and capitulate to right-wing elements of social conservatism, which, as we know in the United States of America, but also in Europe, only lends credence to the most fascist elements in society, to the most fascist forms of governance, the most fascist parties. When you do that, All you do is you just normalize the AFD's position. You lend it credence from the governing majority for no reason whatsoever. Democrats do this for the Republicans all the time. What we know as the ratchet effect, ratcheting towards further and further right-wing politics. It's really, really devastating. And it is going to cause, in my opinion, a lot of problems in the near future for Europe. If we're looking at it from a materials analysis way, isn't all the right-wingers coming into power right now mostly due to capitalists overextending and the public's reaction to protests, etc.? Yes. It's centrists lending credence to social conservatism as the only permissible form of populism. If the public is demanding material change, but also simultaneously saying a bunch of racist shit, and the only thing that you as a neoliberal can allow is like maybe offering 10% more racist policies, all of a sudden you haven't changed the material conditions on the ground that is causing that volatility, causing that anger to begin with. And all you've done is lend credence to the fucking right-wing positions. And you will never be able to defeat the right-wing populace in their own game. No one in America is ever going to say, yeah, I'm voting for the Democratic Party because they're racist. So when the Democratic Party does behave in very racist ways or permit right-wing, white nativist immigration policies, for example, you're not actually winning over a majority of people that are like, you know what, I'd rather go with the Democrats because they're doing racism in an appropriate way. All you've done at that point is just basically create an environment where the Republicans can go, see, no matter what they do, they will never be able to deal with immigration. We can deal with immigration because we're the real racists. And even they recognize it's bad. Look, there was no better demonstration of this than Donald Trump turning around and being like, who built the camps? Obama built the camps. It was so wild. I felt like I was taking crazy pills when Donald Trump would openly be like, Obama built the camps. Why didn't you yell at him back then? And it's like, bitch, I yelled at Obama too. And Biden is now building the wall. You think that matters? When you look at, yes, I know I described the CDU in Germany. I know. It's identical, okay? Centrist, center-right politicians like the Liberal Democratic Party in the United States of America or the CDU in Germany unironically create an environment that causes actual far-right parties to gain prominence because you are legitimizing their position.
Religious Zionist party that followed those elections in November of 2022 specifically stated, quote, the Prime Minister will work towards the formulation and promotion of a policy whereby sovereignty is applied to the Judea and Samaria. Judea and Samaria being the Israeli right-wing term for the West Bank. As a result,
like, dude, racism is easy politics, okay? It's so easy. It's so easy. The broad majority of every population is stupid as fuck, and stupid people are easy to dupe with reactionary framing. Okay, the fear of the other. It's like a very base natural phenomena. Okay, it's like some lizard brain shit. And that's precisely what Democrats lean into as well. UB is correct. When rhetoric enables the subjugation of the other for the sake of security theater, fascism is always going to be the result. While it's not the same, America has consistently enabled the southern border as the reason for our rise in fascism, or our treatment of black and brown populations, our treatment of the working poor. And conditions worsen, we cannot ever have any courageous leaders sit back and offer the material changes necessary to fix these problems. So all we do is try to like push the problems away. And the only way to push the problems away, the only way to sweep them out of sight and out of mind is through a militant machine. A machine that moves us closer and closer towards barbarism, fascism.
Result, in February of 2023, the Israeli Defense Ministry agreed to transfer most of their administrative powers in the West Bank over to a West Bank settler named Bezalel Smotrich, the leader of the religious Zionist Party and the brand new coalition government's appointed Minister of Finance. A move that effectively appointed Smotrich, an avowed Jewish supremacist who openly opposes any Palestinian statehood at all and denies the existence of the Palestinian
Smotrich is a manlet, I've come to find.
People as the de facto governor of the West Bank. And while the move might not have been accompanied by the same kind of pomp and circumstance that went along with Russia's declared unilateral annexations of occupied territories in Ukraine, this Israeli transfer of authority in the West Bank from military rule to civilian rule effectively amounted to a quiet de jure Israeli annexation of the West Bank anyway, and further cemented Israel's long-term designs on incorporating the territory even further at the expense of the Palestinians, and in contravention to the agreed-upon Oslo Accords of 1993 and 1995. And thus, for Netanyahu to compromise.
Hasan, do you believe Israel could ever become so belligerent and self-destructive to American interests the U.S. will drop them? And is that copium? Yes, America will never drop Israel. What are you, fucking nuts? No. America will just reign in Israel before they drop Israel. What do you mean? Dude, I'm telling you right now, no matter how fucking horny Netanyahu is, okay, no matter how horny he is to have one last hurrah before he loses power and may even go to prison, no matter what happens, America could technically still say, dude, you're done. You're done.
On any plans of further incorporating the West Bank into Israel would mean betraying his own coalition partners who were keeping him in power, which significantly tied his hands on the negotiation.
Oh yeah, Netanyahu's not going to prison for war crimes, for corruption. Yes. I think part of the corruption case was literally him giving money to Hamas, actually. Wasn't it? Hold on. What was the corruption charges against him? He was indicted for breach of trust, accepting bribes, and fraud, which led him to legally relinquish his ministry positions, ministry portfolios, other than prime minister.
With Saudi Arabia, who was wanting to see at least some symbolic progress against the occupation of the West Bank being made. But progress was still being made nonetheless, with the Saudi crown prince himself saying in September of 2023, mere weeks before Hamas's attack on Israel, that every day the prospects of normalized relations between the kingdom and Israel were getting closer. All of this build-up to war began coming to a head in 2023, when Iran and the Saudis first negotiated a full restoration in their own diplomatic relations in March, with the mediation of the Chinese. A clear attempt by Iran to present itself and its axis as being less threatening to Riyadh in order to dissuade the Saudis from seeing the need to ally any further with Israel. Clearly, Iran does not want its two biggest self-declared enemies in the region, Israel and the Saudi monarchy, actually cooperating together against them. Iran would prefer to divide and conquer, and prevent Israel and the Saudis from being able to cooperate against them. Divided, they are easier targets for Tehran and their axis to work against independently, one at a time whenever they believe the times are right. Any deal between Tel Aviv and Riyadh that would disrupt that capability would have thus been anathema and unacceptable to Tehran's regime. Ultimately, as of the production of this video, it's still not precisely clear if Iran ended up having any direct influence or not on Hamas's attack on Israel that was launched on October 7th. But Hamas and Iran do have a very long relationship. Iran somewhat supports Hamas's regime in the Gaza Strip because they share at least one core aligned goal: the total destruction of Israel as a state. But Hamas is not just a total proxy of Iran that answers directly to the Ayatollah in the same kind of way that Hezbollah in Lebanon does. Hamas and Iran have core ideological and theological differences that matter. Hamas is a militant Sunni Islamist and Palestinian Arab nationalist organization, while Iran envisions the ultimate establishment of a pan-Islamist state ruled by their own Shiite clergy that would, assumingly one day, include all of Palestine as well.
I mean, I don't think the theological differences matter at all, especially considering that I don't think that matters at all, especially considering that they are literally closer to the Shia regime than they are to the Muslim Brotherhood, which they originally started as an offshoot of. So it's not, I don't think this is like a religious war. I don't think religion plays this big of a deal. Religion plays an important role when discussing places like Jerusalem. The symbolism of what Jerusalem is and who gets to control Jerusalem is important to the entire Muslim world. It's important to some of the religious Jews as well, but and maybe even Christians too. But ultimately, it's not. I don't think that this is like a religious war as much as it is a way to purge the region of American. A way to purge the region from American influence, which, by the way, is a foolhardy endeavor, and it's not going to happen, but still, that is the major point here.
Of course, differences in ideology haven't stopped Iran from cooperating with other regimes in its axis of resistance before, such as the Arab nationalist and nominally secular Assad regime in Syria, but the differences between Hamas and Iran are still notable nonetheless. Hamas has historically cooperated with Iran and the rest of the axis of resistance in a sort of marriage.
Hamas is technically closer to Wahhabism, I guess? Fuck no. No. What? Absolutely not. Not even remotely close to Wahhabism. No. No shot. No. Absolutely not. Bro, they literally fucking killed ISIS members inside of Gaza. You know who's closer to Wahhabism? Israel, okay? They're the ones who play the enemy of my enemy is my friend type shit when they were aligned with al-Nusra Front in Syria. No. Hamas in and of itself, like Hamas as an institution might be Islamist, or Hamas leadership might be Islamist, but that doesn't, that's neither here nor there. They do not operate with Islamist purpose. If that was the case, then they wouldn't be advocating to release like the leader of the PFLP, for example.
Of convenience. Not because they do so enthusiastically, but because there's basically nobody else in the world who will actually directly support them against Israel, as Hamas is recognized as a terrorist organization by basically the entire Western world and Egypt. Hamas knows that Iran views them as essentially a pawn on their board of the Middle East. A pawn that can be sacrificed to achieve strategic outcomes, like finally crashing the Israel-Saudi normalization process once and for all. But Hamas has been left with no other choice but to operate as Iran's pawn, and even independently of Iran's reasons and influence. Hamas had their own motives to launch their attack on October 7th as well. By provoking Israel into launching a massive retaliatory invasion of the Gaza Strip, it puts Saudi Arabia into a very uncomfortable position. Would they, as the self-professed leader of the Arab world and advocate for the Arab people, continue?
The goal of any kind of terror attack, any kind of attack of like indiscriminately lobbing missiles or kidnapping IDF members or even kidnapping Israeli citizens and civilians is always the same. It's one and the same. It's the same goal that the PFLP had if they were to fucking, take over a plane, like hijack a plane. It's always to make demands of the Israeli state, or rather to engage in a negotiations process, or depending on how desperate they are, to make the occupation as costly as possible. That's it. Like, it's never anything beyond that. There is no like additional, we want to exterminate all the Jews type shit that American political commentators try to consistently claim is the overarching goal here. No. They indiscriminately fired upon civilians, including killing and even taking hostage a bunch of Thai immigrant workers. They killed a bunch of Druze people as well. They killed a bunch of Arabs when they went into Israel proper. Their goal overall is to make the occupation be costly, that they're still there, that they cannot be ignored, that you can't simply trap, 2.5 million people into a open air prison and then have another 2.5 million under occupation in the West Bank under an apartheid structure. You just can't do that without repercussions. You might not agree with that, but that is the ultimate goal. Like the ultimate goal of the HasanAbi broadcast is serving you 3-minute ad breaks at the top of the hour. Here's a 3-minute ad break now.
Normalizing relations with Israel in the midst of cataclysmic suffering of the Palestinian Arabs in Gaza, continuing to do so would have fundamentally undermined the Saudi monarchy's own legitimacy with its people, and with Arabs and Muslims the world over. And so potentially with them deciding to stop the deal, the Saudis and Israelis wouldn't end up being able to cooperate together against one of Hamas's biggest supporters, Iran. The pace of continued recognition of Israel in the Arab world from the Abraham Accords may finally be stopped. The unresolved question of Palestinian statehood may finally return back to the forefront of political discourse in the Arab and outside worlds. International pressure on Israel may continue to grow, and perhaps the Israeli government would feel less secure in their looming plans to annex the West Bank.
Yeah, gotta make money while talking about
potentially
Gaza. Yeah, dude. Can't forget the ads. I know that's my major goal. Like, I wasn't joking. That is the major reason. That's why I talk about like politically unpopular things on a regular basis. That's why I've been relentlessly covering Israel Palestine over the course of the past 2 months, despite the fact that it has like literally led to a massive meltdown. Thousands of people routinely calling me a fucking terrorist, and a supporter of Hamas. And also most people just leaving because ultimately leaving the broadcast because they're too bored of like the constant coverage of death and atrocities over and over again. I do it because I love the money. That's why I do it.
Even feel less secure and continuing on.
Thank you for speaking truth to power, my friend.
Their 16-year-long blockade of the Gaza Strip. So far, it appears that many of these objectives have begun to already be achieved. Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, has already announced that the talks of normalizing relations with Israel will be put indefinitely on hold until the war in Gaza is over, and he has begun increasing his demands of Israel for a deal much further than he was before. Now, the Saudis are demanding that in order for the normalization agreement to be made after the war is concluded, Israel must fully withdraw all of its hundreds of thousands of settlers from the West Bank entirely, something that the hundreds of thousands of Israeli settlers themselves and the increasingly far-right Israeli demographics and parties who currently govern the country will most likely never be willing to accept. And that means that it's highly doubtful that Israel and the
There is no party in the Israeli government that would accept that. Maybe like the communist 5 seats that occupy the communist parties, and maybe like if they were popular enough, like the Arab parties. No shot. It's just not a thing. That is not. It also would be very violent. Like, it would be ridiculous.
Saudis will be able to actually work out a deal and fully cooperate together against Iran going
my
forward.
Links don't work.
Moreover,
correctly.
Washington's strategic plans for a new security arrangement in the Middle East to cover for their reshuffling of forces to focus on countering China and Russia now appear to have failed, with the future cooperation between the Israelis and the Saudis against the Iranians and the Axis of Resistance now appearing to be in tatters. Iran will continue to be emboldened to whittle away at the Israelis and Saudis one at a time, and at a time and place of their own choosing, while Iran's increasingly close ally Russia will be strengthened by the deal falling apart as well, because now the Saudis have very little incentive to turn back online their spare oil production capacity of 3 million barrels of oil a day.
You're a deluded extremist that fosters more divisions than the solutions you claim to seek. No, I'm not an extremist. Well, I guess maybe I am. Actually, you know what? There is probably, if peace is an extreme position, then yes, I am an extremist. If peace, or if healthcare, for example, is a radical proposition in America, then yes, I am a radical, right? The real question is it the correct proposition? Is it the morally righteous proposition? That's what you must be asking yourself. And as far as like fostering more division than the solutions I claim to seek, this part is actually incorrect. The only difference here is that divisions always exist. You are just not conditioned into seeing the perspective of the oppressed. So when I cover the perspective of the oppressed rather than the position that the oppressor wants you to hear, which is that to assure stability, we must continue oppressing viciously, all of a sudden you start believing that this is causing division. This is inherently a reactionary perspective. It is. It's one that Republicans regularly repeat when talking about Black Lives Matter. Oh, you're causing more division by bringing up the fact that black people's position in American society and contemporary American society is still unjust, is one of major injustices. You think it's extreme and you think it's divisive because you would rather have me shut the fuck up. You would rather have people that speak out on injustices shut the fuck up so you can continue turning a blind eye to it. And you could just as easily turn a blind eye to it and maybe watch MSNBC or CNN or any number of other other political commentators online that feed you this, bed by story or whatever the fuck it's called, nighttime story, lullaby. But instead you come here and you get mad and you try to attack me for these positions. Bedtime story. Bed by. Sorry. Well, I'm, ESL. So you have to ask yourself, am I a deluded extremist that fosters more division, or is there something inside of you that says maybe an apartheid is immoral and I'm more mad at this guy telling me that it's an apartheid because it's forcing me to come to terms with what I believe I am? A person who would rather just turn the other, look the other way. You're an extremist, Hamas, Abi. How about you pull up those top of the hour ads to spread your lies of Italiaphobia? I miss those days. Didn't I run the top of the hour ad break? I did. Minutes ago.
Which will likely keep oil prices higher for longer, and which will keep allowing the Russians to continue earning more money on their oil exports to keep pushing back against American influence in Ukraine and Europe. Moreover, America now might not be able to afford to turn its full attention away from the Middle East, like they had previously hoped to do, meaning that America's own forces will have to pick and choose their battles of support between a rotating cast of Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, as the increasingly close partnership of Iran, Russia, and China choose when to strike against global American hegemony next.
Look at much more manageable of a position you got now. I get the position of the oppressed, but we cannot loop in the actions of Hamas or the Palestinian people and defend basically a terrorist organization that takes advantage of its own people for a cause that is one-sided. I am not mad, nor do I want you to shut the fuck up. I want you to recognize the other side. I in no way defend the IDF. I think they should be condemned, but not in a way that involves killing innocent music festival goers. There's so much to unpack here because everything that you just said about Palestinians being conflated with Hamas is a conflation that the IDF makes in the actions that it takes in Gaza. All you do here is say IDF should be condemned. Do you feel like the IDF is a terrorist organization? I certainly do. I do. I think Israel is a terrorist state, just like the United States of America is a terrorist state. Okay? I condemn Hamas, but I doubt that you would condemn Israel as a terrorist state. Do you believe that Israel is an apartheid? Do you believe that Israel is violent in the maintenance of an apartheid state? Okay? I have not once, never said that killing innocent music festival goers is an actual adequate solution. You know what I mean? I never said that. The difference is, while I personally don't believe that we should be placing the same moral boundaries on a faction that was born out of violently and in a reactionary manner resisting to an apartheid regime with the same apartheid regime that is a militarized nuclear state that is maintaining said apartheid regime, okay? I can't even get people to play on that same moral playing field. We can't even get Israel and Hamas on the same fucking moral boundaries here. The difference, however, is that it's normal. It is totally allowed to defend Israel unconditionally. You get very mad when someone even tries to analyze the reasons as to why something like Hamas exists. You consider that to be uncouth. You consider that to be defense, apologetics for terrorism. Okay?
The Israeli ground forces are now invading the Gaza Strip and are dedicated to Hamas's complete destruction. It becomes apparent that sometimes you have to be willing to sacrifice a pawn in order to bait your enemy into making a strategic mistake. And it seems like Tehran has played their piece, knowingly or not, extraordinarily well. Of course, there's a lot more history and context to the many, many wars fought between Israel and Hamas that eventually led up to the current war that's ongoing today. The current conflict is actually the 5th war that they have fought between each other, with previous large-scale wars being waged between them in 2021, in 2014, in 2009, and in 2008, and skirmishes and attacks between them being fought all in between, that have all contributed even further to the buildup of total war that began in October of 2023. But unfortunately, due to the inherently violent, controversial, and recent nature of discussing how an organization like Hamas was able to catapult itself into power in the Middle East, and how all of the many wars between them and the Israelis have gone ever since, the next part of this video would almost certainly cause the rest of the video that came before it to become demonetized and age restricted, which ultimately would mean that YouTube's algorithm would have never promoted any of this video to you, and you would probably never have gotten to see any of it. But thankfully, I was still able to produce that next part of this video anyway because of the power of Nebula, where you can go and watch the next full-length part covering exactly how Hamas managed to rise to power in Gaza and how the many wars and conflicts between them and the Israelis have been fought ever since. If you want a broader context behind this conflict with information that this video didn't quite get into, like what the Gaza Strip is and how the conflict between Gaza, Hamas, and Israel has constantly evolved over decades into its current form, then this is what you should check out next, as it's all very important to understand if you want to try and make sense of what's going on here right now. And this is also just one of more than 24 exclusive full-length real-life lore videos that you can only find on Nebula in my overall modern conflict series there that can all only be found over there because of all of their darker, more controversial subject material. There are dozens of other episodes covering how other recent major wars and conflicts in the Middle East began and went that this video also never really dived into, like the rise and fall of ISIS across Iraq and Syria, the modern civil wars in Syria, Yemen, and Libya, a deeper dive into the origins of the United States-Iran conflict, the 2003 US invasion of Iraq, and the 20-year-long American invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, along with dozens of others and brand new episodes releasing every single month that will help keep you up to date and informed with all of the proper context that you need to understand major ongoing crises and conflicts. And what's even more, you also get access to all of the other amazing exclusive content that's on Nebula, because the best part about this site is that it's jointly co-owned by all of its creators, built by me and hundreds of other YouTubers and podcasters. And because it's a subscription-based service, we all get to work on way bigger and higher budget productions over there than we ever could do on YouTube. That's why there's tons of other exclusive content that you'll find equally fascinating from tons of other creators that you probably already know as well.